Seconds. Microphones.
Oh, it's weird.
All right, live.
Hereby call to order the Roseville the Roseville Economic Development Authority. Wow, that was a trip back.
That was.
For Monday, January 13th, 2025. Mr. Executive Director, would you call the roll, please?
Member Groff.
Here.
Member Schroeder.
Here.
Member Bauer. Here. Member Strawn.
Here.
President Rowe.
Here. And with us at the desk, we have our City Attorney, Rachel Tierney, who will be hopefully not called on to do much EDA attorney work. That's my second time today. And our City Manager, Pat Trudgeon, who's also the Executive Director of the Economic Development Authority. Would note for folks in the audience, if you have a cell phone, we want to make sure we silence it so that it doesn't disrupt the meeting. And also no loud outbursts as Vikings score touchdowns or make great plays or anything like that during the game this evening. We'd appreciate that. With that, we'll ask folks to stand if you're able for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next on our agenda this evening is approval of tonight's agenda. We just have 3 business items on the Economic Development Authority agenda this evening. Presuming there's no changes from a staff perspective this evening.
There is not.
Presuming there's no changes from a board perspective this evening to tonight's EDA agenda. All right. With that, then, is there a motion to approve the EDA agenda as presented?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Member Schroeder, seconded by Member Strawn. To approve tonight's agenda as presented. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. We have our agenda for this evening. Next on the agenda then, we will actually forego general public comment to the council meeting. So stay tuned if you're here for that. And we'll proceed right into our business items, as is usually the practice with our Economic Development Authority. This evening, our first business item is the very glamorous role of electing our officers for the next year for the EDA. I'll turn it over to Ms. Kelsey, our Housing and Economic Development Program Manager, to bring this item to the board.
Thank you, President Rowe and board members. Your annual election of officers is required per your bylaws. 2 positions that do not get elected are your secretary, which is automatically held then by the executive director, as well as the assistant treasurer, which is held by the city's finance director. That is written in your bylaws. So tonight you will consider 3 individuals for president, Vice President, and Treasurer.
Right, thank you, Ms. Kelsey. And just by way of a little bit of history for newer members, the tradition on the EDA, although I don't believe it's written into any rules or regulations or bylaws, is for the president role to be handled by the mayor, and typically the vice president role to be the acting mayor as appointed by the city council. Obviously, that's not absolutely required, so we can make a change, and then the treasurer is one of the other members. What is the desire on the part of the board in terms of these positions? Member Schroeder.
I would move that we elect the mayor and, the acting mayor as president and vice president.
All right, is there a second to that motion?
Second.
All right, Member Schroeder moved and Member Bauer seconded to elect the mayor as the president and the acting mayor as the vice president. That would be myself as president, and Councilmember Groff is our acting mayor for this year, so that would be vice president. Discussion on the motion, as the maker of the motion, any discussion?
Makes sense.
All right, short and sweet. Any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. That motion is approved. Is there a motion with respect to the treasurer position or a volunteer?
I'm happy to begin if no one else is interested.
Do we have a motion?
I move that Robin Schroeder be treasurer.
All right, is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Seconded by Member Bauer. Groff to appoint as our treasurer again for 2025. Discussion, well, and first of all, you said you're willing, so we've got that base covered. Any discussion on the motion as the maker, Member Groff?
She did an exceptional job last year, so I think she should continue.
Finances are in good order.
Finances are in good order.
As the seconder, Member Bauer?
No, I will just echo that.
All right, any other discussion on the motion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of approving Member Schroeder as the treasurer, signify by saying aye.
I
Opposed?
Did you get asked?
Passes unanimously.
guess it was assumed he looked at me and I didn't say no, so.
I asked if he was actually said he was willing to be vice.
Oh, I didn't hear any objections.
Too late now.
The machine has moved forward. I suppose technically under our rules, if there was a motion to reconsider, since we all voted in favor of it, that's possible. But I don't think we need to go there.
No.
All right, that brings us to probably the highlight of the Economic Development Authority portion of our meeting this evening, and that is our Sustainable Steward Awards. This is, I believe, the second year that we've been doing it in this format, and so third year, wow, my goodness, how time flies.
Second.
Let's stick with
Good
the
job.
second then, all right. With that, I will turn it over once again to Ms. Kelsey and Ms. Bakken to make introductions and talk about the awards and who are our winners this year.
Great. I'm just going to quickly highlight the program and then turn it over to Noelle so that she can highlight the winners. And by the way, very impressive that we had 24 applicants this year, which is the most that we've ever had. This program, by the way, was originally done by the HRA back in around, I want to say, about 2011. The program wasn't widely being utilized. We had a few applicants at early onset, and then it kind of just laid dormant. Once we had Noelle as a full-time employee here at the city of Roseville, we were able to work together in 2022 to revise the application, which we brought forward to the board for your review. We have now awarded, as of last year, 2023, and then this year of 2024. It was very hard this year for us to narrow it down, but I got to tell you, there was some wows in the application, and one of them is tonight, one of those winners. But the one thing that we do want to note is with sustainability, there's always finessing that you have to do or look at the application. And so Noelle and I are going to be doing that this year, most likely bringing it forward just for you as a update of some of the things that we're incorporating to make sure that we're also giving that opportunity for some other improvements that people are doing as recognized in today's world. But I'll turn it over to Noelle so that she can review some of those winners for you.
Sure. As mentioned, we had many very impressive applicants this year. I told one applicant that we had to really split hairs this year to choose our winners. So it was a tough competition. But our bronze award winner, I'll start with bronze, we'll move up to gold. Christina Krepola is our bronze winner, and we were impressed. She did a lot of work this year. She had a home energy squad visit in 2024. She installed solar energy panels on her roof this year as well. She'd also previously, in the last couple of years, installed a programmable thermostat and air source heat pump. She had done some work on her garage, which involved reclaimed materials. And then she also, really notably, she did a lot of community outreach work as well. So she worked with creating rain gardens at Lexington Park, as well as serving on the MnDOT Metro Sustainability Committee. And she also volunteered with Habitat for Humanity in 2023. So we were really impressed by her work in the community. So Christina, I don't know if you're here. Christina Krepola. Did I pronounce your name wrong? So Dan, would you like to?
Sure.
And then Ian, if we're gonna do a quick photo too as well. So I would say you can go behind. Okay.
Thank you for all the work you've done on sustainability in the community and on your property. Congratulations on your bronze award. And I think we want to get a picture here, if that's all right.
Thank you.
And we should have certificates too. Did we have a certificate signed on?
Is that in the signature
It
packet?
might be.
It is in the
It's in
signature
there.
packet.
That's
Right.
fine.
Okay.
We'll make sure and get that taken care of.
Our silver award winners were not able to be here tonight. They had concert tickets, so we very much appreciate the last minute. We weren't able to get them to come last minute, but Carol and Tim Wall were our silver award winners. They've done quite a bit at their home. Notably this year, they did a home energy squad visit and followed up with an insulation project, as well as replacing their air conditioner with an air source heat pump. They'd done a lot of previous work as well, including community work. They've adopted a couple of storm drains near their house, and also so they said they take care of others that they see as necessary when they come up. They recycle organic waste and food scraps at home, and really notably, they also bring their own reusable containers when they go get takeout, which is an issue that's close to my heart after working on Green to Go. They got some electric lawn care equipment this past year and also are working on some native plantings. So congratulations, Carol and Tim. And then finally, our gold winners are Anne Frenchick and Ted Thompson. Anne and Ted had a really impressive application, and it was so impressive that we actually included all their actions in the packet. It was about 6 or 7 pages worth of work that they've done, not only this year, but in the past few years as well. So they've adopted storm drains, they've done insulation, they have installed efficient appliances, they installed an air source heat pump and an efficient furnace, and they also this year got rooftop solar installed. But what the things that really impressed us a lot were they've done a lot of really good work with reuse as well in their yards. So they've done a ton of repurposing materials for their deck, for landscaping, lots of pollinator plantings and all sorts of things. So they really kind of embodied what we saw as this award. It really blew us away when we saw their application, and it was an easy choice. So we're very excited to award Ann and Ted the gold award tonight, so I'd like to come up and, yeah.
Do it right for the picture. Here's the money part, and here's the certificate part. I wanted to thank you again for all the work that you've done in your own property and in the community to help sustainability.
Thank
And
you.
we can picture with the certificate. And
I'm
you-
excited about this.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
This is like a kid.
All right, and there's no pressure at all, but you know, you're the incumbent for next year, so.
Yeah.
it all depends on you.
Okay.
You're not.
This is why we're giving them.
We're not quite as polished as the Oscar awards.
We didn't frame them because we wanted to get signatures first before putting them in the frames, so. So yeah, it was a very exciting year. We're very proud of all of our residents in Roseville, and we included a list of everyone who applied just because in the packet, because we were so impressed with all the work that everyone has done. And I'm always just blown away by the dedication to sustainability we have in the city, so.
Well, it's really great to see, and I think this program continues to grow in interest, and I think we just continue to have people innovating in how they are addressing these issues in the community, and so we're really excited to see that. And it's good to know that there's tough competition each year to win the top awards, but I think that once again, the competition just makes us all better and our lives better in the community, so appreciate it on everybody's behalf.
Thank you.
Back. All right. Next on our agenda, business items, our final business item this evening is to receive a presentation on preliminary market study data from Stantec on our housing study, to use shorthand language to introduce what it is. Once again, I'll turn it over to Ms. Kelsey, our Housing and Economic Development Program Manager, to introduce the consultant as well as the presentation this evening.
Yep, thank you, President Rowe and board members. Tonight, I'm going to turn it all over to Tom Layton, and he can introduce his staff member as well that is here. As you'll see, we're not going to cover the whole presentation that was in your packet, and the reason being is time. The previous presentation, unfortunately, because Tom's illness fell, we had to cancel the last meeting of the EDA. But we had that information in your packet again. You can certainly ask any questions of Tom. But I'm going to have him highlight some of the things he wants to cover with you tonight, as well as get your feedback and any other questions you may have. So I'll turn it over to Tom and his staff member.
Welcome.
Hello, happy to be here with you again. And I'm sorry I missed the previous meeting, I was really spiking a fever right at the time of the meeting, and I was like, I should not go to this. So,
I think you made the right call.
yeah, but I know it may have inconvenienced you, so I am sorry about that. So Tom Layton worked for Stantec. My colleague Zoe Tsai works on my team at Stantec. She's responsible for a lot of the analysis in this presentation. I want to get clear on the timeline here because I can be as abbreviated as I need to, or I can dig into some things. So how would you like me to target? Is this a half-hour conversation?
We have allocated 1 hour for this agenda item.
Okay.
So
Right.
if you use 55 minutes, we've got 5 minutes for discussion. Let's put it that way.
And I welcome you to interrupt as we go along. So if you'll remember from when we outlined this work, I think it's really beneficial for policymakers to have an opportunity to sort of digest and work with the research when a research phase is done. So the research includes your housing inventory. It includes some things about the market dynamics around housing here. It includes the demographics and the employment context that has a lot to do with who are the people that live here, who are the people who have needs here. There's some objective analysis here that try to quantify in some ways needs according to certain categories. And I think it's all thought-provoking and establishes a baseline for us to get clear on some of the main types of households and individuals who have needs in Roseville, some of the types of housing, the physical structures that may have needs, and it really sets up a next conversation, which is about what is a menu of potential strategies that can be considered to address some of the needs that we've identified. So this is the conversation about the research, what does it say about Roseville's housing context, and the next conversation, which may be in 4 or 5 weeks, because we've already started moving down that path now. The next conversation will be about how do you respond to these possible interventions or strategies or policy changes that could plausibly be taken up to address some of these needs. So that's sort of the long introduction to what we're doing tonight. Does that make sense? All right. I'm going to see if I can put this more in a presentation mode. There we go. Check it out. Okay. So in terms of context setting, here we are looking at the city of Roseville. One of the things we like to do early on is understand the physical context, and particularly what are your assets, and sometimes there are physical challenges or locational challenges that sort of define the desirability of a community. And Roseville is rich in amenities and assets that are attractive to folks that want to live somewhere. And with the retail districts, with the parks, with the lakes, also with nearby employment. And I think a couple other fundamental locational aspects are your proximity to both downtowns. Oftentimes that's an employment destination. The proximity, the convenience in the for getting on the whole regional transportation network. You're also surrounded by stable residential settings in the other suburban communities, and in fact in the part of St. Paul you're adjacent to. So I see Roseville as having these durable locational strengths that are going to continue. I think you have as sound and durable locational strengths as any place in the region. That it seems highly unlikely that at some point in time these strengths will not be sufficient to maintain a really stable community. That puts you in a very strong place in terms of continue to be attractive to residents, to new development, but also to be able to incorporate development that meets needs of populations that need affordable housing or of different kinds without, I don't think a deep concern that is going to be a tipping point for community decline because of your underlying strength. So I wanted to spend a little time just talking about how I see it. I don't know if you share that view, but it seems like it has that very strong foundation from a locational sense. In this study, we did choose a small set of comparison communities. This is primarily for when we're looking at demographic and economic data. If we say you have a certain percentage of families with children and you have no point of reference for that, that doesn't mean a lot. So we picked some comparison communities, and these were some communities that we determined with your staff, as well as being able to compare Roseville to the Twin Cities metropolitan area as a whole in a lot of these exhibits. We start with the underlying economy. And you're probably familiar with this, but you have over twice as many people coming into Roseville to work as you have Roseville residents who are leaving Roseville to go to jobs elsewhere. That's a very strong employment base. I'm going to skip a couple slides here. Go to this one. If you look at I don't know if it's big enough for you to see it well, but it looks like some of you have it in front of you as well. We look at the different industry categories that make up your economy. And the one I'm going to draw your attention to is the one at the bottom, because when you're so job rich, to compare your percentage of jobs to the metropolitan percentage tells you less than the number of jobs you have per 1,000 residents, because that is a better measure of the job density in these industry categories. So you essentially have, I'm going to see if I can turn on pen. You essentially have three major industry categories here. You have a healthcare and social assistance category that's very strong. I think this is a little bit dispersed. I think a lot of these staff are supporting some of your senior housing and care facilities. So they may also not be the higher paid medical jobs that sometimes the healthcare industry has. You have obviously a very strong retail trade and food service base in your strong destination retail districts. And then you have a number of categories that are likely situated, I'm not very good at drawing circles here, or even rectangles, that are situated in your industrial districts, but a really good number of strong businesses there, and those tend to be working class jobs that pay better than average. So you have some categories that probably pay lower than average, some categories that probably pay better than average. Some of these are professional, scientific, technical careers, which are probably well-paying careers. In terms of, I'm going to move up to demographics. One of the signs of your strength as a location, attractiveness as a location, is that Roseville has been seeing housing growth again over the last decade. And it tapers off a little on the population. There's been population growth as well. It tapers off a little on the population because you've got this counter trend in terms of household sizes being reduced over time. So, household growth aligns with housing growth essentially.
Do you know what the driver is for that? Like, if you were to put it into segments, if you were to break it down on age?
It's broad demographic trends that are happening everywhere because the boomer generation is going to singles and couples without children, and as they age. And another wave is young folks that are 20 to 35, which are oftentimes pre-children. So given those two demographic bubbles, we're at a time when household sizes have declined.
And that's what your data is showing, that's what's happening here in this data for Roseville.
Does this take into consideration though the large dump we put of new housing, rental housing? Does that take into consideration any of here?
That's represented in here.
Not in this particular thing though, right? Cause this goes only through 22?
Yeah, and in fact, when you're using ACS data, it isn't even as up to date as it looks because your 22 data is an average of 2018 to 2022. So really this is data that lags 4 years when you're using this census data. We in a lot of ways complement that with other data sources, and you'll see that as we move through. But ACS data is very strong, consistent data set, but it does lag.
So this is data on housing so the data that we're using for this housing is data that is, if you will, pre-pandemic, or like the change of housing trends.
For this slide, it will be partly pre-pandemic, yes. And you know you've had a lot of new housing built in the last 4 or 5 years, so you may get someone who was surveyed in 2022 who's living in one of those new units, but some will be missed because of the era of this data. But we do have other ways of looking at that. We have a number of graphs now that are sort of this style, and I just want to show you how they work so that we, they look a little mystifying initially. But you can see Roseville is a cluster of bars at the left, and then the Minneapolis-St. Paul MSA is the next cluster of bars, and then the 4 comparison cities. And what this does is it breaks down the age of residents in age segments. So within the Roseville cluster of bars, the segments at the left are the younger age cohorts, and the segments at the right are the older age cohorts. And you have to, if you squint and spend some time with it, you'll notice that the older age cohorts are 22, the oldest two, 65 and up, are 22% of the population of Roseville. And that is notably high compared to the comparison cities. So older population on the average in Roseville. As we go through the demographics, also keep in mind that this correlates to your housing stock. You have a high, relatively high number of older folks because you have a lot of senior housing. There's 2,400 senior housing units in Roseville, which is 15% of your entire housing stock.
Would you say that that's also a factor of people sort of aging in place in their single family homes?
Absolutely. Yep, in both places, yep.
In that slide, will your final report also have the trend data for that to say over the past, 4 years, 5 years, how that's changing? Key thing I'm looking for is like
We could add
what
trend data for age.
Yeah, what
Yes.
demographic is moving in or moving out, or like help to understand desirability amongst a certain cohort.
Yes, we can add the change. We produced it, it just didn't make it into this part.
Yeah.
So we can show the trend line for the different age segments. Next one is household structure, and the thing I would point out really aligns with the older population is the largest bars are single people living alone. Those aren't all seniors, but some of them are, and married without children. So those are very high demographics. That doesn't mean you don't have some married with children. You have 16% of your households are married with children, which aligns pretty closely actually if you look at the comparison communities in Fridley, New Brighton, Richfield, and St. Louis Park, 16% married with children. So you're definitely continue to attract families to Roseville.
Is it married without children? Just how do you distinguish between those that are young in 20s, 30s without children versus those that are empty nesters?
This particular exhibit does not distinguish between those. So you're right, it's probably some of both.
Given our older population, I would expect that number to be high. But I'd be curious to know the younger side of that.
I want to note 2 things on this slide. First of all, again, this is for Roseville, this is a set of income bands. The lower income households are on the left. The highest income segments are on the right. just compare that visually to the Minneapolis-St. Paul MSA. I mean, obviously you have the households that are across the income spectrum, just broadly represented across the income spectrum. It's almost identical to the metropolitan statistical area as a whole in the distribution of that. Some of the comparison communities are weighted towards lower income households. St. Louis Park is a little more weighted towards upper income households, but it's striking in the representation you have across the income bands. Now, if you look at the dynamic trend chart at the top, something else pops out, and that is that Roseville aligned in terms of its median income, aligned very closely with Fridley and not sure what New Brighton, is that the other one on the lower bands? Or maybe it's the Minneapolis-St. Paul MSA on the lower bands back 15 years ago. And now it's so aligned with some of the lower income communities. It has moved over that period of time to being higher income. You know, you still have a broad representation, but higher income on the average than a lot of your peer cities.
You maybe are the most memorable on this as far as how many units did we put into operation between the Edison, the Oasis, the Harbor? Because those are all gonna be people, they're gonna all be within the last 2 to 3 years that are gonna reflect.
We may have somebody who has those numbers.
About 600, the Edison Harbor and St. Edison, I'd say like 650.
Total units.
With the Owasso Gardens.
Okay,
That's the families and the senior.
so it's about 650 total units amongst those, including the Owasso Garden development on Rice Street.
It's 25.
So you're adding some moderate income households in those.
No, these are gonna be
Some-
low income.
Some lower, yeah,
Gonna
there's
almost all
especially on
be
the
low
two, or at least on the one side of either the Oasis or the Harbor, whichever one it is.
Or
They
was,
both are affordable
Oh, okay, that's right, yeah,
senior
affordable senior on the one, yeah.
but the Edison as well, and the Owasso Gardens is
It's also affordable senior.
60%. So just feel like it might move since you're saying this data lags.
Yeah, so it might not be accounting for those. Those populations will be in generally, I think, in this $40,000 to $60,000. Because median household income for a family of 4 right now in the metropolitan area is $120,000. So 40 to 60,000 is probably could even be a little higher than that as your 50 to 60% AMI. So it's the low to middle bands in this income where you'd be adding households.
We don't know for sure how other households in other bands have changed over that time too.
That's
because
right, and we
there's
have
certainly
some
the median
interesting-
tends to grow, as we've seen in the graph.
We have some interesting, I want to jump to this one because we have some interesting data here that shows another trend that's a little bit countervailing to that. So all of your comparison cities are having reduced home ownership rates. But Roseville is the black line, and over the last decade, the story this is telling us is that there may be a number of rental properties that are converting, desirable enough that they're converting back to home ownership properties.
I don't think we have a problem with that.
Again, though, I mean, if we added all those units of rental, that significantly could impact the overall rate of home ownership when you look at all households.
Skip over that one. This one just sort of illustrates that in terms of rent levels and in terms of home values, Roseville is right in the middle of the pack in terms of the comparison cities. The trends are looking very similar. Aside from Yeah, and I'm gonna skip over this one too. This is sort of a real world look at how much households are paying for their housing. So a cost burdened household is a household that is spending more than 30% of their income on their housing costs. So that would be rents and utilities, or it would be their mortgage, insurance, and taxes. And you can see that in Roseville has the highest percent of its renter population that is severely rent burdened. And that means that they are paying over 50% of their income on their housing costs. So between the two, your rental households are paying 46% of your rental households are paying over 30% of their income on their housing costs, considered to be cost burdened. That's something that we break out a little bit more further in the slideshow. But it's a high level, and in some respects it exceeds the comparison cities.
On this slide,
Yeah.
it would be interesting to see also in the data, either raw or also the years of like cost burden, meaning that some of these, as we've shown in other slides on here, that mortgages already paid for and taken care of. It'd be interesting to see what the cost burden is of houses purchased, say, within the last 5 years, 10 years, somehow do that segment analysis. Because you have later on another slide
That is true.
that shows that, but then I would expect what you showed to be there, but we've broken out like more recent home ownership.
And I think we don't break it out in that sense, but I think part of, I'll go to the other slide, the other cost burden slide. I think part of,
That one.
this one, I think part of why there's much lower cost burden for homeowners is because you may have many homeowners that have paid off their mortgage already or gotten their mortgages a long time ago, so they're at.
Yeah, no, I can very much explain this. I'd be curious to know what the recency, because I think there is in a lot of the data that's presented here, a time bias, right? And so it'd be interesting to tease that bias out and to look at that data and understand, those 20 to 30 year olds that are moving into the city, what their situation is.
Well, it's interesting to think of the notion of the cost burden too, because I think we sort of traditionally have an idea that Roseville's sort of rental rates aren't necessarily as high as others in the marketplace. In some senses, because I know like when they were building one of the projects recently that wasn't an affordable project but was a market rate, at that time they were still asking for assistance from the city because the market rate rents necessarily wouldn't support the costs of the building. But I don't know if that goes back at least a couple, 3-4 years, so that might not be the case anymore. But that was an interesting thing. So when you compare the fact that there's a high percentage of people who are either cost burdened or severely cost burdened, I wonder if that comes from a little bit of our spread of our incomes and maybe having a higher percent of people in those lower income categories, even though our rents aren't super high necessarily, because of the population that we're talking about that are in those income ranges, that might not jive well, even if our rental rates aren't necessarily the highest around.
Two thoughts on that. One is that the development you have in progress right now, market rate development, parallel apartments, are they receiving subsidy from the city for that? That's what I thought. And so that's a indicator that
They've caught
market
up.
has come up.
Yeah.
And I imagine those rents are gonna be $1,600 a month, $2,000 a month, $2,400 a month. So
Do you take into consideration like what the occupancy rate is in multifamily units in this situation? To get a sense of how that compares in the cost?
yeah, I'm jumping around a little bit.
Okay.
I hope that's okay.
Okay.
Because I think these are good questions and we happen to be able to jump to some good information about that. So we have this is our section on the housing stock. Then we have a section on the market demand context. And part of how we look at that is by looking at what's being built. That tells us something about housing demand. And you've got things that over the last 10 years have been built sort of across senior, affordable, market rate spectrums. In this particular illustration, we already also went a mile outside of Roseville because those are also good comps for the kinds of housing that, you know, would work in this market. I'm looking for a rent and vacancy, maybe that's not in this section. The rent and vacancy trend lines. Or did we lose
I don't
those?
think we have it in this packet.
No, I didn't see that.
Oh, we lost those. We had in this market analysis section, we had metropolitan rent and vacancy rate, and we had a Roseville rent and vacancy rate. And we did, what was interesting to me is that for the Roseville alone, we looked at buildings that had been built up till 10 years ago to look at what their occupancy was and how rents have grown for pre-existing buildings to the last 10 years, not impacted by, to see how they performed over the last 10 years. And the vacancy rate was about 4.5%. Compared to a metropolitan vacancy rate that's over 7% right now. So that's an indicator of demand. And rents had been rising for your pre-existing apartment buildings at a faster rate than metropolitan-wide rents have been rising. So those are both strong indicators of demand. They're indicators of, and so those are, that's real-time data, that's not lag data. Those are also indicators that folks who are renting in those pre-existing buildings are under some stress from those rent increases.
So maybe what had been thought of as naturally occurring affordable housing isn't quite that anymore
Yeah,
in some senses.
Yeah, it still is, it's just less.
Yeah.
Less so, right? It's a matter of degree. Yeah, and we see this in the region where the natural affording housing stock, because it's such a valuable commodity and it's the housing people need, that competition for that housing stock has been driving up prices and making it less affordable. It's a strain on households. I'll go back to see where I left off.
Housing affordability, cost-burdened households.
Okay, but I'm jumping back just a bit to show, our inventory. I like to think about when housing was built because that says something about what the needs are of that housing stock. So this chart shows that in Roseville, 75% of the housing was built between 1940 and 1980. So a good share of that housing, that housing has needed to be kept up, repaired, renovated, or else it's not in very good shape. So I'm sure you have some housing out there that, really is past due for that kind of improvement. We looked at it geographically here so you can see the neighborhoods that belong in each of those categories.
Would you be able to determine that level of upkeep by pulling permits, remodels, those kinds of things versus just purely on the age of the house? I know if you look at Ramsey County data, it will tell you, that information of remodels. Not the degree of accuracy, I don't know, but it'll at least give you some insight to say like, here we're just assuming all houses built at this time have not been upkept or not, or we're just applying, but there's data there to tell us a little bit more.
Right, you're right. And we have sometimes looked at housing inspection data, if they've got a good coverage of housing inspection data, we have sometimes looked at that.
Pulling permits for models or pulling that bit of information helps understand like, what percentage or degree of homes are being upkept or maintained.
By whether they're getting permits pulled for remodels.
Improvements, things like that. It'll tell us a little bit more of
it could.
what the quality of the stock is.
It could, sure.
But that's not in your report though.
That isn't in our report and we hadn't planned to do that, but that's not to say we can add pieces if they feel important. this is a little bit of an illustration of a housing mix. You've got 57% are single-family homes, 35% are apartment units, and 8% are townhomes. So there's a good amount of rental stock in there, more than you see sort of in the MSA as a whole, but pretty similar to these other communities that were built
When
at
we
a
think,
similar
when we
time.
think about housing types, is it important just to think in these three categories? Or like when we think about filtering, right, empty net, everything from first home to just married to one kid to multiple kids and that whole filtering process. I know later on you have a bullet point talking about filtering. Does it make sense to take a look at this housing type and see like, oh, actually we're short 2-bedroom homes or we're short 3-bedroom homes?
Yeah,
And understanding like, cause this whole transaction requires someone having a house available for sale to be purchased, so they leave and this whole filtering process can occur.
yeah. We do a little of that further on in this, and that I think gets at a little bit of what you're talking about. So as you know, we mapped the affordable housing inventory here. It's varied in terms of year built, number of units. Some of it is rent subsidized in that tenants pay 30% of their income. Federal government makes up the rest. Some of it is rent capped. So it's different affordability prototypes, but it's a nice mix. And I've outlined those for you. The senior housing landscape is just very abundant. As I said, 2,400 senior housing units, 15% of your whole housing stock. This again has been developed over many years. It covers really the breadth of senior housing types and care types, assisted living, memory care, independent living, nursing care. Some is affordable, some is market rate, so just really a broad spectrum of those opportunities. And yeah, we were talking with a developer the other day, and he's considering doing a senior housing development here. And I said that that's not daunting to you, you don't see this as meaning that the market is saturated? And he said, the need Roseville is a great place for senior housing. And there's a need in the region, not just Roseville. So we wouldn't be looking just to Roseville residents for this, we would be attracting ongoing need in the region.
Have we assessed vacancy rate of those senior units specifically?
I have not
I
looked
mean,
at
because
those
it would be important to
vacancy rates.
differentiate as well between independent living, assisted living, and skilled nursing. I don't know if we have much in the way of skilled nursing, but there's quite a few that bill themselves as assisted living, which would have a different type of client. But I think in the independent living, I know that anecdotally, we had heard some of them had a higher vacancy rate. So
Yeah.
that does make me pause, as you did as well, whether or not there's a significant need for that unique type of residents at this time.
We have access to, we have two tables here that comprise our senior housing inventory. We have access to market data that will tell us vacancy rates by property. It's more reliable for the newer properties, but we can get some of that pretty easily. I'm looking back at Zoe to see if she's making some notes on these things. Thank you, Zoe.
Well, I think this kind of raises a policy question too. As a community, do we want to be sort of the destination for seniors from around the region
Yeah.
in the sense of what that does for needs for emergency medical services, in terms of what that does? Does that make our demographics even skew more older than they already do, and what does that mean as far as what we're looking to be as a community as we go forward? So I think that gets to some questions about if we start talking about tools, where do we apply the tools and
How do you prioritize
right,
among
exactly.
I appreciate that comment, because what we're doing here is we're observing, mostly without judgment, Had surprised to hear from a senior housing developer that they might be interested in this and had the conversation, so we're collecting information. When we get to our policy options, that's when you wanna think about, well, based on needs, but also based on all these other factors about wanting a balanced community and whatever feels relevant, where do we wanna prioritize our energy and our resources? So they're slightly different conversation, but they're both important.
This is just a sampling, right? Cause this is not all inclusive. I see at
Well,
least.
between these two tables, we think it's all inclusive of senior housing developments. So we developed these through a number of research methods, and then we had your very competent staff look at it as well, and I think they plugged one or two holes. So we think this is inclusive, but if there are senior housing developments that you're aware of that aren't on this list, please tell us, and because we want it to be inclusive. So where do we wanna, now I wanna get into some of the objective analysis. So as we think about housing needs, there are 3 quantitative approaches that we took that just sort of shine a light on different aspects of what the need might be in Roseville. The quantitative approaches aren't even the whole story in themselves. We're also learning through the demographics and understanding the stock. And we've probably talked to 12 or 15 stakeholders and developers already and get insights from that. So, but doing some quantitative work is important for, some views into this data. So this is the first piece of quantitative work we did that essentially puts your household incomes in categories and put what the affordable rents would be in those income categories in, line them up with a category for what the affordable rents would be in that, and did that for a spectrum of incomes, spectrum of rents.
Sure.
And
Can
the
you
rents aligned with, sorry?
give context to what the colored boxes mean on the side there?
Sure I will. But let me finish the setup here. So the rents categories align with the income categories according to what rents would be affordable for those income categories. So then if we look at the number of households in those income categories and the number of housing units in those rent categories, you get to look at sort of a basic alignment. And so if it's red, it means there are fewer housing units in that rent category than there are households in that corresponding income category. If it's green, it means there are more housing units in that rent category than there are households in that income category. So this gives us I will say this is a very crude alignment, and it understates the actual need in 2 ways. One way is in that band of incomes, people are at the top end of that or the lower end of that. And in that band of rents are at the top end of that or the lower end of that. So there are matches in there where people are still paying over 30% of their income, they're still housing cost burdened. And the other thing is that people don't always rent the homes that are aligned in this way. You might get someone who earns a healthy income who rents a home for $800 a month. And then that's a home that's not available for someone who really was lower income and really, might like to be in that. So this is a first cut at thinking about the alignment of your stock and your population, but it's an underestimate of that need. And then this cost burden analysis is the second objective analysis that really gives a more accurate idea of what needs in your communities are out there, how many households really are in a fragile economic state because of their housing costs. Again, the lighter colored salmon it means that they're cost burdened, and the darker colored, almost to maroon, means that they're severely cost burdened, paying more than 50% of their incomes on on their housing. So you can see by this that, really any households that are earning up to $75,000 a year, many of them are spending more than would be ideal on their housing costs, which makes them fragile economically. But we also have that information for the owner-occupied housing, that's the lower chart, and much less cost burden there, but there's some cost burden there as well. The third objective analysis starts with this slide, and that is to look at a projection of your future household growth, future housing growth. And this is a Metropolitan Council projection that estimates 511 housing units in the next 10 years growth. The next thing we did is we distribute that growth. And we did that here by looking at a large sample of people in the metropolitan area who have moved in the last 5 years. And this gets to a little of your sort of fine grain in terms of types of housing units. So these households that have moved in the last 5 years, we have them organized by income level, and how many of them rented, how many of them owned at those income bands, what size of units did they rent in those income bands. So this is an estimate of sort of a distribution of demand. These are people who are moving. If you had all these housing types at income levels or at rent levels and ownership levels that work for these people, this is the housing stock they might want in Roseville. So it's a way of thinking about how that demand gets distributed. Of the 511 units in the lower right corner, you can see almost as many of those recent movers rented as owned. So that's a trend we've seen recently where more households that are moving are looking for rental properties. And then you can see that on the ownership side, there's a great benefit for larger homes, which may be harder to find in Roseville, but larger homes, 4+ bedroom homes. On the rental side, the demand is for 2s and 3 bedrooms and, lower cost rental units. So that's just a picture of where, sort of on a metropolitan basis, what they're looking for and how that might array with the 511 households in Roseville.
Once again, that's the 511 that Met Council is projecting over the next 10 years.
That's right.
As likely to end up in Roseville.
And that can obviously be impacted by policy. You may be able to be very assertive and attract more than that, or, maybe you don't reach that number. So this exhibit helps us to think about what kind of housing is available at different income levels, because just because there's demand for things doesn't mean you can meet that demand with brand new housing in every case. Sometimes certain needs have to be met with existing housing, and what are some of those housing typologies that can meet existing needs, that can meet new housing needs. So that's sort of a little bit of a bridge to thinking about, given the needs that we're discussing, a little bit of a bridge to thinking about what are those housing typologies that correspond with that we might choose to try to foster in one way, shape, or form. So we didn't do a lot of further analysis with that, but I think it's a thought piece. And the last thought piece is this, which is just a way of humanizing who are these people who earn 50% of area median income, 60%, 80%. So for these occupations at the left, if there's one income earner in that occupation, that's one end of the barbell. And if there's 2 wage earners, a 2-person household at that occupation, that's the other end of the barbell. So you can see a retail salesperson, if they're a single-person household, is making 30% of AMI. And if there's 2 retail salespersons, they're making 60% of AMI. And you can see construction laborers, licensed nurses, machinists, elementary school teachers, many of those occupations are earning 50% of AMI if they're single persons or if they're single-headed households. So it's just a way of
Does that
humanizing
take into
it.
account children or dependents?
No, this is just the householders.
So
Yeah,
if someone,
This is just the earners.
so if there was 2 waiters or waitresses, but they had 4 children, that would keep them from being at a 60% AMI.
Their earnings would still be at a 60% AMI.
It doesn't go by household size.
Well, when you get to qualifying by units, I think you know the next layer of detail on this. When you get to qualifying by units and by unit size, it does break down to household size. You're right about that. Yeah. So this just looks at earning, what are wage earners earning? And it compares it to that 100% AMI level that is established for, that's based on a family of 4, which also is not a universal metric, but but that's what it's based on. So all that being said, we did a little summary work here, and you're familiar with the SWOT analysis. This ended up, the important criteria here in our minds ended up being assets, challenges, needs, and opportunities. That fell out of this work, but also fell out of all these conversations we've been having. So I don't know if this should be called an ACNE analysis as opposed to a SWOT analysis, except there's an O at the end.
No.
Can't be ACNE. ACNO. This is our ACNO analysis. But this is where we...
Soon to be copyrighted or trademarked.
Soon to be copyrighted. These are just some takeaways that I'm gonna put on the table. They're not, we could have put different bullet points on some of these. But I think it's a kind of a conversation starter for you, and this is where I would wanna pause if we even have any time left, and just say, based on this conversation, what are you seeing as needs that you're tuning into here that we ought to be thinking about as we gather strategies? So for the assets, I think we talked about the strategic location in the region. You know, it's gonna be a stable, attractive community for a long period of time. Talked about your broad diversity of existing housing types, which is an asset to your whole community at every income level. You have a strong organizational infrastructure and expertise already in this area. That's unusual. Not only that, but developers are saying, by and large, that it's an easy city to work with, which is a really attractive thing for developers. So that's an asset. You've been doing zoning code amendments, you've been developing programs, all of those are assets. Challenge is land availability. You're a fully built suburb for the most part. Developers are facing challenges in this environment with workforce costs, with interest rates. Homeowners are facing and renters are facing challenges with home sale prices rising, rent levels rising. That means also that people aren't moving as much. Some of the local affordable housing organizations are facing challenges, and so they're less capable partners at this moment in time. That's hopefully getting worked out. In terms of your needs, we see the need for affordable housing at all levels, so you get to choose what feels like a niche that, you know, is targeted where you want it to be targeted, but that need is across the board. Maintenance of older housing stock. Again, we don't have all the data that says how many homes, but we can presume that there are homes out there that where the homeowner could use support keeping up that housing unit. Support for older residents and financially precarious households, you know they're out there. Stronger networks and partnerships of resources is another need to build, to keep building those partnership networks. And lastly, outlined a few opportunities. Again, I don't know if these are necessarily the key opportunities or if some other ones might be more important, but we're throwing out there, you have a remaining opportunity to do new housing at and near Rosedale. Some of the other major destination districts malls are doing that. You're gonna have continued opportunity to do smaller scale infill housing and to think about how to make that easier for developers to undertake. Preserving the affordability of some of the affordable apartments would be an opportunity to look at some targeted additional zoning changes to ease small-scale production. And obviously you have this new resource that you can think about how to leverage in the metropolitan sales tax. So that's the research update.
Any follow-up from members of the board or questions or things we want to look for as we go to the next stages? Member Strong.
I just wondered, were you able to take into consideration anything from work from home as far as visits through Roseville, jobs in Roseville versus jobs out of Roseville, just kind of that post-COVID, either fully remote or hybrid scenario and what the impact that might have on housing?
Yeah, I don't have a good way to, we could look at that some more, but I don't currently have a good way to think about how many Roseville residents are fully remote or semi-remote. Certainly understand how it impacts their housing choices, their desirable housing. They need an extra room or really attractive kitchen island, to do that. So, but Zoe, is that something that you have a sense of where there may be additional data on, the percentage of people that are working remotely? Okay. We've done some work in Northfield and see a lot of commuters to the Twin Cities from there, and have always suspected that a lot of those commuters aren't commuting to the Twin Cities from Northfield, they're just doing their work at home.
Anecdotally, the traffic on Mondays and Fridays is much less on 36 than it is on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, so I would assume that work from home has an impact on that.
Yeah.
But,
Zoe lives a mile from our office and she's in on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays.
Well, I think one of the things we've noticed, just specific to that, on Highway 36, Highway 36 used to be primarily a backup westbound in the morning and eastbound in the evenings. And much more recently, the westbound evening traffic has grown and has created issues, and so, I've even had some conversations with the people at MnDOT about looking at what they need to do to deal with that. So they've said they haven't got answers yet, or even at whether something needs to be done at the levels we're talking about. But certainly, I think people in Roseville have recognized that is a change from years and years and years of a pretty consistent pattern. Westbound morning, eastbound evening, much more of a mix now. Which I don't know exactly what's contributing to that, but obviously that's a change from what we've seen in the past.
Roseville remains a desirable place to live, even if the commuting is less frequent because of your proximity. The proximity can still be very important to the downtowns or labor centers. It may even make Roseville a little more desirable in terms of congestion on the roads.
Up to a point.
To a point. I mean, in terms of
The more issues we'll have.
in terms of reducing the congestion. But
Other thoughts or questions from members? And certainly we provided some feedback over the course of the presentation as well. So if we've made notes of that, and that'll be, to the extent you can incorporate that into the next phases of things, I think that's what we'd like to see.
Great. We'll look forward to talking to you next time about a range of strategies that can be considered as part of your housing policy.
I think that would be great. I think this would be good for this presentation to end up sort of living on our EDA website somewhere to help with people in the community who may want to see some of this data and understand it as well. So we'll kind of direct that comment to staff.
All right, great.
Thank you again for all the
Thank
work
you.
you've been doing, and look forward to those next stages.
Yeah, great.
All right, that brings us to the end of our business before the Economic Development Authority this evening. The only other item on our agenda is a motion to adjourn the EDA meeting. So
Second.
it's been moved by Member Gross, seconded by Member Strawn. No discussion on a motion to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. We're adjourned from the EDA, and there'll be a short break to transition the room for the council meeting. to order the Roseville City Council meeting for Monday, January 13th, 2025. We'll note, and it is 7:13 p.m. We'll note that the roll call stands as called for the prior EDA meeting, all members present. Once again, our city attorney Rachel Tierney is joining us, as well as our city manager Pat Trudgeon, and various other folks, staff and others will be participating and introduced as they come into the meeting discussion. We've done the Pledge of Allegiance as part of the EDA meeting, so we'll forego repeating that. The next then would be the consideration of tonight's agenda, and I'll check with staff once again. Is there any change from a staff perspective to tonight's agenda?
No, Mr. Mayor, there's no changes to the agenda.
And from a council perspective, I know we've only got a couple of business items, and so hopefully will be fairly straightforward. Any changes from the council perspective? All right. I think it would be appropriate then to entertain a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Schroeder, seconded by Councilmember Strawn to approve tonight's agenda as presented. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. We have our agenda for this evening. Next on our agenda is an opportunity for general public comment. We will certainly provide for opportunities for public comment on agenda items as those items come forward. But we do always at the start of each meeting provide an opportunity for public comment on items that are not on this evening's agenda but may be of interest to people in the community or otherwise related to city business. Once again, the rules of the road for general public comment are the same as they are for public comment on specific agenda items. We do ask folks to introduce themselves, either say their street or address for the record at the beginning of their comments and their name, and then also direct comments or questions to the council. And we do have a 3-minute time limit, which I try to generously but gently enforce. Welcome this evening for a general comment.
Hi, Roger S. Wagner Place. I just happened to notice tonight that on April 20th, 1944, the state attorney general ruled that a city could not help an American Legion build a building. And I don't know if that has anything to do with what you're playing with the VFW, but hopefully somebody has actually looked at that. And then also, I like how you streamline your meetings late in the last few months and year. And one thing I noticed that you don't recite your oath of office every meeting, but you do the Pledge of Allegiance. Myself, I don't think you need to do the Pledge of Allegiance every time. The beginning of the year, and maybe when there's a flag holiday or flag remembrance thing. But I don't think you need to be doing it every meeting, just like you don't do your oath of office all the time. And then my last thing is a question, which I don't know if you can answer or not, but it appears there was possibly some voter fraud during the election for the State House of Representatives. And I don't know if the city has investigated that at all, or if a different entity does that, but someone should at least be looking at that, whether it's the police or the city attorney or another entity. So I was just wondering, do you know if anyone is looking into that?
I don't know of anyone that's looking into it. I believe, and certainly our attorney can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the jurisdiction, especially in a legislative election that's not a city municipal election, would probably be something like the State Office of Administrative Hearings or somebody like that. But I will defer to our attorney if
Even
she
though it
has any
happened in
additional.
Roseville?
It's really about the level of the seat that is.
That's why I was
being
wondering if
contested.
it's a different entity looks into that.
Yeah, and I think it has to be based on a complaint as well. But I don't know, Ms. Tierney, if you've got additional thoughts in that regard.
I can't say for sure. I do have a recollection that it is actually comes full from the Secretary of State's office.
Okay.
It may be the Attorney General. My understanding is it's not the police department. I can certainly look into that question.
I'm just curious, because I don't know if it's if it's a criminal crime or how voter fraud is handled, so.
I think
I just hope somebody is actually taking a look at it.
I think to the extent that there's accusations of it, those accusations have to take the form of a complaint with the appropriate entity to then investigate.
Even when a judge ruled that, whatever.
Yeah, well, once again, I think the ruling of a judge on a particular matter is kind of the answer on that matter. But I think we have to kind of leave it there because we're definitely approaching the
That's
limits
fine.
of our
Okay, thank
expertise
you.
at this table. So thank you. Is there anyone else here for general public comment on items that are not on tonight's agenda? All right. Very good. Well, thank you again for those who participated in the general public comment. And we'll then move into our agenda this evening. We do have under business items, our first business item is to consider approving a temporary liquor license. And I'll turn over to Mr. Trudgeon for introduction of this item for the council's consideration.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Bent Distillery is asking for a temporary liquor license for a winter luau event on January 18th. As that's coming up, that's why we did put it on this agenda. We got the application late, but he's asking for a temporary liquor license, and this will be their first event in 2025. And they are allowed, any applicants allowed up to 12 per calendar year for having a temporary liquor license. So the consideration tonight is a motion to approve the temporary liquor license for Bent Distillery for an event on January 18th.
Thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. Are there any questions from the council for staff on this item? I think you clarified once again that it is a one of 12 that they're eligible to apply for and
Correct.
and receive. Each one is considered independently by the council and requires council approval. I'll just double check. Is there anyone from the public here who wishes to speak as to the request from Bent Distillery for first of 12 possible temporary liquor licenses under state law this evening? Anyone from the public wish to comment on that item? Does not appear to be the case. Do we have a motion from the city council with respect to this request?
Second.
That's a motion to approve the request. All right, that's moved by Councilmember Groff, second by Councilmember Schroeder. We had a former Councilmember Schrader with us a couple meetings ago, so that's what's getting me discombobulated, among other things. All right, we've got the motion once again to approve that temporary liquor license. Any discussion on the motion as the maker, Councilmember Groff? All right, Councilmember Schroeder. Other discussion? All right, once again, we've got the motion before us. All those in favor of approving that license signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. That license is approved. That then brings us to sort of our main event this evening, which is to begin some conversations with respect to next steps that result from the request of the city of Roseville to the voters for the ability to put in place a 0.5% sales tax for the funding of a maintenance facility project. As well as the outcome of the vote that the voters did not approve the sales tax for the associated License Center and Dance Studio project as well. And so to get the process kicked off, I'm going to momentarily turn it over to City Manager Trudgeon to begin the process, but I did want to just maybe set a little bit of context, which may be repetitive of what Mr. Trudgeon's already going to say, but certainly this is conversation number one of many that will have to happen on something like this. Obviously, depending to a certain degree on some of the direction we might give this evening, which we don't know the answers to that yet until we have the conversation. But making the temporary presumption that there is something going forward from this evening, there would be, as will no doubt be outlined, a number of steps in the process. And so this is certainly not a case where the council might take a vote this evening and all the decisions have been made for the rest of all those steps. This is only, I think, an attempt to get some preliminary direction and some understanding further maybe questions the council may have or more information we may need, et cetera, to go through any additional steps that are warranted based on our conversation this evening. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Trudgeon after having stolen some of his thunder.
That's all right, I have a lot to say tonight. So thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. As mentioned, this is the first of many, many conversations the council will have regarding this project. And so as we've not had an opportunity to really have a conversation as a council and staff about the results of the election in November, this is the first time we have that ability to do that. And we do want to talk about any next steps for the construction of the new maintenance operations center that did receive approval to be funded by local sales tax, and also talk about the license center itself and what to do about that. There is a lot of ground that will be covered tonight, as noted in the staff report. I think what I tried to identify are the larger components, and under each of those components are dozens, hundreds of other decisions and thoughts that we need to factor in throughout the process. So as mentioned by the mayor, this is not a night that we're making any final decisions, and actually probably any really preliminary decisions. We are looking for some guidance about next steps so we can bring back additional information so the council and the public can see more information about what we could possibly do moving forward. So there is a lot of ground to cover, but as I said, we're not looking for any final decisions to be made. I know there is going to be a lot of questions that will come up about particulars, and the thought process of how we proceed will depend a lot on that information. I think one thing the council will see is that in order for us to probably get some better information, we'll need to have some people help us do that, whether that is the public or consultants to help decide some directions and get more information so the council can be better informed in making those decisions. So with that, I have 8 items that I kind of want to cover, and this is covered in the staff report as well. One is just the implication of the sales tax referendum results. Second is moving forward with the maintenance center operations project. Talk a little bit about implementing the local sales tax, what needs to be done. Then we want to discuss the license and passport center, kind of what's next and what we want to do with that. And then if we decide to move ahead, what that funding options would look like. We also want to talk about the next steps for getting to the final design and project management. Also talk about community engagement, and then there's some miscellaneous items that are still very significant that we'll just touch on briefly here tonight. So with that, just as a reminder for the council and the public, what we're talking about is a project that was approved in 2022 as a pre-design, as a concept, not as a fully fleshed out project, where we would basically move the current maintenance facility, which you can't see my mouse, is kind of where number 2 and 3 is, and 6 and 7, to across the street where number 1 would be a new maintenance facility to the north side of Woodhill Drive. That would be primarily in the area of Veterans Park and the VFW, and then stretch all the way over to Lexington with a yard and some storage bins, and that's where the Lexington Shops buildings are right now. And as a result of that shift in building location, the VFW is proposed to be located at number 2, and then the License and Passport Center, along with the dance studio, would be number 3, and then there'd be a parking lot in the middle there to serve that. Then additional green space at 6 and 7 that would could be some small park, but also just gathering space for the public. Everything else that's labeled on there, well, I shouldn't say everything else. We also identified pretty early on the need to have buffering around the project on the north side of Woodhill, so that's 9, 10, and 11. We talked about making some more pedestrian connections at 12 and 13. And then 8 is the City Hall, 5 is the Oval, and 4 is the fire station, just to put that all in perspective. And this is just the rendering. I'm sure you've seen it many times already, and how the finished product will look like, at least based on the pre-design. So enough about that. So as mentioned, we did have 2 questions on the ballot this fall, November 5th. One for the creation of a local sales tax to pay for the Public Works and Parks Operations Facility, and another for the License and Passport Center. Question number 1 passed, as you can see, and question 2 did not pass. So to simply state it, the voters really approved just the creation of a 0.5% local sales tax to pay for the construction of a new maintenance operations center, but did not approve the use of the sales tax to pay for the License and Passport Center. I want to note that the failure of question 2 doesn't necessarily mean that the License and Passport Center cannot be built or needs to be built, just that the funding for that project could not come from sales tax. As noted throughout the report, the existing License and Passport Center located in the Lexington Shops will need to be relocated if the maintenance center project goes ahead. And we still have some space needs in the existing facility that we do need to address at some point. So the need is still there, just the funding mechanism cannot be sales tax. So probably the first thing we should have the council consider, and I think we'll be answering these questions to the council at the end of my presentation and after public comment and council discussion. But one of the first things we should have the council weigh in is really, given those results of a split vote and giving any other context you want to bring to the conversation, does the council want to proceed in exploring and planning for this project, primarily the Maintenance and Operations Center, and talk through the License and Passport Center and see what's available. You will note that I did change my question slightly, and so I appreciate the feedback from others. And really just asking the simple question, shall the city proceed with the planning and implementation of the new maintenance center? Previously, I talked about as shown generally in the pre-design plan. I think as we'll get into it, the pre-design plan is what it is. But there might be some additional considerations that we may want to alter some of that site plan, especially in the location of the License and Passport Center and maybe the VFW. So it's really, I'm asking the council the question, do we want to move ahead and continue planning and looking into options for the planning and of the Maintenance Operations Center and the overall project? We know there is a lot of information that needs to come, and it's going to be really hard for the council to say definitively yes, full steam ahead until there's more options. But I also wanted to ask the question, because if the answer is no, there's no interest at all in moving ahead with any part of this project, then we can cut this presentation very short tonight and catch the Vikings game. But I anticipate that there's going to be a need for some additional information here. But so as a baseline question, I just would like to have the council weigh in on that. And as I said, we can get to those questions at the end of my presentation. So I want to talk a little bit about the mechanics of actually implementing a local sales tax. Once again, this would just be for the Maintenance and Operations Center. We do need to notify the Minnesota Department of Revenue at least 90 days before we would look to start collection of the sales tax. And we need to pass an ordinance and provide some other additional information down to the Department of Revenue to have that take effect. It needs to be done 90 days before they would collect it. They start collections on the first day of each quarter. So as we sit here today, for instance, if we were to approve those documents tonight, which we're not prepared to, we don't have the documents ready to do that, the soonest we could start collecting local sales tax would be July 1st, 2025. If we are desirable to hit that date, at some point we would need to pass the ordinance and supply the other documentations before April 1st of this year. If we go beyond that date, then we would have to wait till October 1st to collect the date. There's really no rush to start it, but there's also no need to delay that as long as the council is comfortable moving ahead with some form of the project. Once the collection starts, the clock starts ticking for the 20-year collection. And if we find that we reduce the scale of the project or maybe not go ahead with the project fully, we would just collect what we would need to capture our costs, and then the sales tax would be over. But as the state law is written right now, it's up to 20 years and or the total cost of the project. We're looking into some details and what that means with the License and Passport Center not being in there, but we'll come back to that at a later date. But real simply, the mechanics are just providing information and having the council pass an ordinance instituting the local sales tax. And I think that's fairly straightforward, and that can come at any time once the council feels comfortable. So one of the questions I do have is there what information would you need to have in front of you or decisions made, maybe more appropriately, before you'd be comfortable in instituting that sales tax and getting that process started. And if nothing else, it's just for scheduling purposes, so we know kind of when we need to factor that in. So let's talk about a little bit about the License and Passport Center. First off, I should mention, in shorthand, we're calling this License and Passport Center. As shown in the pre-design plan, the License and Passport Center always had the dance studio that's operated by the city as part of that. I think conceptually on the second floor, the first floor would be License and Passport Center. As you may or may not know, we used to have the dance studio at the Fairview Community Center that changed over to a Petuteca, and there was no longer space for the city. So we have moved the dance studio into a pretty small space, all considering into one of the bays, the Lexington shops. And so that picture that you see there is us in operation there. So my understanding, we have about 400 or so students that take classes there, and that's used year-round. So when I talk about the License and Passport Center, if I fail to mention the dance studio, that is part and parcel with that. However, if council makes some decisions to, for instance, the first couple options, leasing or not going ahead, we still would need to figure out some solution for locating the dance studio. I'm not saying necessarily need to build a new facility, but we need to find space somewhere for them to operate effectively. So just with that caveat, I wanna go over maybe 4 options for the city council to consider regarding the license and passport center.
Before you go into those options, is there some aspect of the, what was the sort of the broad category license and passport center that was also some storage for city needs? In addition to the dance studio and the license and
So
passport?
not necessarily storage, but office space. Thank you for bringing that up. So currently, our seasonal parks folks, these are the typically college kids and younger that provide our programming. There is a need for some office space to store shirts and other information and have meetings. They used to be downstairs in the lower level, but we had to move them up for make room for the police department. So they're currently in an old office bay at the Lexington Park Shops. So it's not necessarily used year-round, but it's something that is needed. I think if we were to have a dance studio and license and passport center, as a year-round program, the staff for the dance studio would use that, and we could also use that in the seasonal. So the storage, we are hopeful that the maintenance facility would cover all their storage needs that we would have in here.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for that question. So 4 options to consider, and there might be many more, but here's the 4 that I've identified. One is we could just close the license and passport center, and that would remove the need to replace anything. That's not something I recommend. I believe it provides a really good service to not just the community, but the surrounding area. It does bring in revenue for the city to use towards property tax relief, and I think overall it's been a very successful license and passport center. We're one of the busiest ones in the state, but that is an option. Second is you could look to lease a new facility elsewhere in Roseville. There's lots of vacant storefronts that we could certainly go into in commercial areas. I would remind the council that we originally started talking about the need of owning it when we rented from the Lexington Shops. And the decision was made years ago to, instead of paying rent, let's own the facility. And so when we make improvements into it, we can actually see some benefit from that. It's not as a tenant improvement, but that's certainly an option. The last 2 options are locating the building on the campus. Number 3 is if we just kind of go along with the pre-design study and put it as a separate building, a 2-story building, kind of in the northeast corner of a vacated spot from the maintenance center. The 4th option is really to look at locating it on the campus, but perhaps using an existing building, an existing maintenance facility. I know that's been brought up a lot of times. That was obviously built as a maintenance facility. While there's some offices in there, there would need to be some retrofits. And don't know what that cost is and how feasible it is, but that's certainly a possibility. I also added if we were somehow to keep the facility on the north side of Woodhill, that's a possibility. I think we run into some issues with that given the amount of yard space that we're trying to get and the space, but that's something we can look at. So what I'm looking for here is one of my questions, and what should we pursue regarding the future of the license and passport center? I think that perhaps the council can't maybe fully answer that, but if there can eliminate some options, that would be really helpful. I think having some additional review and study of possibilities on the city campus might be the appropriate move, but that's for the council to discuss. But certainly any of those are on the table for the council to consider. So, as mentioned, the sales tax did not pass for the license and passport center. So if we were to build the license and passport center, we would need to find some funding alternative. And as you know, the estimated cost per the pre-design study was $12 million. And we'll touch on this later. I think we really need to freshen up those numbers. If you look closely at those numbers from the pre-design, about half of that $6 million is contingency and soft costs. And that was purposeful, and that was the same with the maintenance facility. There was a lot of contingencies. At the time we estimated those costs were coming right off the heart of COVID. Construction costs were really crazy, and we factored in 7% inflation rate for 3 years of construction, as well as added a lot of contingency because of the unknown here. So I think that number can be reduced, but we really need to get a better sense of what the market is at right now. So just so for right now, the $12 million is what we'll use, and maybe that will change. In the packet, bond counsel attorney Mary Ipple did provide 3 different options for the city to potentially borrow funds for that construction. One would be the Port Authority general obligation bonds. The Port Authority is special legislation that we received, Port Authority powers, I should say, special legislation received in 1987. The city did, and this is something that we were able to put general obligation bonds, which are backed by property taxes. However, as part of the Port Authority, we do not need to go for a referendum, but it does use property taxes to back it up. In 2011, the council did approve the issuance of Port Authority bonds to fund about $27 million of park renewal improvements throughout the city and the new fire station. And that was a big amount, and we're paying closer to $2.4 million each year in debt service backed by property taxes. The last payment for that will be part of the 2027 budget of $2.4 million. And that capacity, so to speak, is available for the council to consider starting as part of the 2028 budget. As you will see, that timing, as we sit here today, could work out very well. As would be about the time we'd be building a new facility, if that's the path we go towards. And so there might be some existing levy already in the budget that we would not have to raise any property taxes, and still have some left over to do whatever the council feels needs to be done with that remaining balance. So I just mentioned that we've had some past history with the Port Authority and have used that in the past, and we have one that's rolling off through 27. The second option is to do an Economic Development Authority revenue bond. We just met as the Economic Development Authority, and this would be basically that the EDA would own the property and the project, but the city would lease back from the EDA the cost of the project, and that would be backed once again by property taxes. I would mention that, and does not require a referendum, revenue bonds do not require a referendum. I would mention that both with the Port Authority and the EDA revenue bond, while it is backed by property taxes, it can be supplemented by other funds. So for instance, with the License and Passport Center, it would be an ability to take some of that excess revenue to put towards payment of that bond. There would not be enough to cover the full payment of such a bond, but it could help contribute. As you know, we put about $200,000 from License and Passport Center to the general fund for property tax relief. So there's usually some dollars left over. Obviously, if we were to use that, that would have an impact to the budget and we'd have to make that up elsewhere. But that's always a possibility with both number 1 and 2. And I think that is a reasonable approach to look at as we look at trying to fund this, is try to blend some of the revenue we get from a License and Passport Center along with property taxes. The third option is a city revenue bond. This is a straight up revenue bond, meaning that the debt incurred for the project of the License and Passport Center would be paid solely by the revenue of an entity of the city, and that in this case would be the License and Passport Center. While that's an attractive option, it just doesn't pencil out. There's not enough excess revenue to cover that debt service. So while that's an option, it's not a real feasible one. So those are the three main borrowing, financing opportunities we have here. And once again, I would want to check in at the end of the meeting if there's any preferred type, or have a conversation about what you would need for additional information. Once again, I think even if you were to give a preferred type, we would want to bring back a lot more information, including Ms. Ipple to talk through all the particulars of how that would work. Then we would also have to think about the timing of that. That's not necessarily something we would do tomorrow. It would be down the road. But I think the council would want to have it sorted out as part of the License and Passport Center discussion to understand how we are, even if we're not making the affirmative decision to do certain today. We want to have a sense of where we're going to go. So having that information would be helpful for staff just to plan and then bring back additional information. So also to consider as far as some next steps is eventually move to final design of the project. This is assuming that we're going ahead with the project. So there's really two main components of that. One would be to hire an architect to look at the final design. And then also look to bring on a firm for project manager. There's two main types, construction manager advisor, which the company would serve more as an advisor, and the city would own all the contracts and enforce the contracts and be pretty deeply involved. versus a construction manager at risk, which my understanding just was made available for cities as part of the 2023 legislative session. And this really shifts the risk and the work to a private firm that really handles everything from start to finish. With the project, they would work on the timetable, the specs, they do the bidding, they award the contracts, they would hold all the contracts, they would do the construction management to make sure it is done in the way it was designed, and would also guarantee a final maximum price for the project. So this is really a way for the city to make sure it's going to be done in a cost-effective way and also be done in a way that we can be confident that it's going to be finished in the way we want it to be. There is a third alternative, which I haven't mentioned, is to have staff being the project manager. Quite simply saying this is too big of a project and we lack the expertise and the bandwidth to do this. In the past, we've done some of these projects. I think of the Cedar Home community building where we did manage that. And that was a lot of work for sure, but that was a much smaller project. I would not think we should seriously entertain having staff manage this project. I think we need some third-party assistance. So, in my original ask, I asked about the fact that, hey, can we have permission to start writing RFPs so we can start going down this road? I think I probably put the cart before the horse. I know there's going to be a lot of discussion here tonight about some design alternatives, especially around the License and Passport Center that we already referenced. There might be even some work we want to do north of Woodhill. And so perhaps the most prudent measure would be first to have a conversation about bringing on board an architect to really look at those alternatives, work with us on the alternatives, and come back with some options so we can sort that out so the council can make a better informed decision. I think the full design or the final design as well as the project management probably should wait until we have some of those sorted out and the council gives direction that we want to go. You might go through the alternatives and find that you don't like any of them and we're not going to go forward with the final design. I don't know, but I think we need to do that first. So I'm going to narrow my question to really say, would the council be interested in us drafting an RFP to really hire an architect for the very specific purpose of looking at some alternatives and trying to sort that out as we move forward, then that will inform us for the next steps, which could lead to a final design and bring in a project manager. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the community engagement plan for the project. One of the main components is the creation of, and this is a mouthful, so we have to come up with a better term for it, Pacific Campus Final Design Stakeholder Group that will provide feedback on the final design of the project. I try to use the initials, it just doesn't work, doesn't flow. So, but anyway, this would provide feedback on the final design of the project. And the intent is to involve stakeholders, including residents around that area, as well as our commission members in the VFW, to really look and provide feedback on the final design. This group would not be intended to debate the merits of the project and whether it should go forward or not. That's really at the council level. It's really to look at the final design. We are purposely trying to create this group at the level of involve and collaborate on the IAP2 spectrum, that's the International Association of Public Participation, to really bring forward voices and be intentional about that. By operating at this level of engagement, we plan to work directly with the public throughout the process to ensure that their concerns are understood and considered. We also plan on partnering with the group to help develop alternatives that identify the preferred solution, and we'll look to incorporate the group's advice and recommendations in the final decision to the maximum extent possible. So not only would this help staff as we move forward, I think it would really help the city council and sorting out some of those details and getting feedback that's really important for this project. The actual group, and I would be looking for feedback on all of this here later tonight, but looking to have a membership of about 10. We would have 3 residents of surrounding property owners, and that's the Grigg Street residents. There's also folks to the north in Lexington Apartments and Townhomes. There's also folks on the east side of Lexington. It'd be great to get a distribution of each of those areas. I'm not sure if that's possible. I know the Grigg Street folks have been very involved in the process, and I'm sure they would certainly want to be very deeply involved in that. So that's something we can talk about and sort out. Also, we need to have a representative of the VFW as part of that. Then I'm looking for one citizen representative for 5 of our commissions. And as a reminder, all of our commission members are residents of the community and volunteer their time. And they all have an interest in this project on some level. So I would propose that there'd be one member from the Equity and Inclusion Commission, the Finance Commission, the Parks and Recreation Commission, Planning Commission, and the Public Works, Environment, and Transportation Commission. I would also suggest maybe adding one city council member to be part of those discussions and involvement and help the process and be there as part of the process. And not only could they contribute and understand the background of the project, they can hopefully represent the group forward as at the council discussions. And certainly we would welcome the group to come and present to the council as well. Anticipating that the work of this group would really be in 3 phases, and really basing this a lot over on how our Parks and Recreation Department does playground planning. There's really 3 phases. So the first phase is really prior to anything being put on paper, is kind of a brainstorming idea and feedback and input about issues that they may see or things that they would like to see as part of the design. And all that. As part of that, there'd be a listening session, both with staff and an architect. And this is, I should preface, this is all if we're at the final design stage, right? And then we would take that feedback and input and then come back with some alternatives. This is what we heard, this is what we believe you want to see, and maybe there's several options. And once again, get that feedback loop going again, say that looks great, that needs to be worked. And then a third phase would be coming forward with some final designs and trying to gain consensus on that final design and make a recommendation to the full city council. So I say 3 phases, so that's at least 3 meetings, but each of those phases might take a couple meetings. I know this is a lot of details here, so it may take a little bit longer than we anticipate, but that's kind of the concept of how this group would work. Also would want to involve the city commissions as a group or as a whole commission, not just individual members. So once again, on those 5 identified commissions, that they would have a couple of touch points. One, I've instructed the staff liaisons to make sure in every monthly meeting there's an update on the project. In some months it might be very little to none, other ones it might be pretty involved. It'll just be a standing agenda item that the liaison would be able to report back on where we're at the process and what new information we have to share. Also, there'd be very specific things that each commission may work on. So for instance, the Finance Commission may look at the financing options and make any recommendations or review some of that, the issuance of the debt. Planning Commission is going to need to do some action on zoning and comprehensive plan re-guidance at some point. Park and Recreation and PWET we thought could be involved in maybe drafting of the RFP for the final design, but certainly looking at the final design as those are covering the operations of those commissions. So those are just some examples where there'd be some very specific asks of the commissions, and really we need to factor them into the whole process. Then we would do some general public engagement. Obviously, we would have a dedicated city website page, promote that through the social media and newsletter. And beyond just the project status, I want to really have a page for transparency's sake about the sales tax and what we're collecting and how much we've gotten in and where we're at with the collection. Because I know I heard some feedback from people, how do we know this is going to be spent where it needs to be? Well, I could say pretty categorically it will be spent where it needs to be because there's state laws governing it, but that doesn't mean we can't be transparent about it and talk about what we've gotten in so far. And just for information, I looked again at the report this afternoon. Based on the study done by the University of Minnesota, if we had the sales tax effect in 2021, so this is 4 years old now, we'd get about $5.4 million annually. So I would expect the number would be maybe a little bit higher, but I have no idea what that would be. That just gives some context on the amount of dollars that we could be bringing in for the sales tax. So once again, I'll be asking is this engagement approach appropriate and what changes should be made or added to this approach. Last few items. I want to talk a little bit about the VFW. I know that is a really big issue as they're central to the whole shifting of buildings and facilities. So I would mention a couple things. The city will need to purchase that facility, the existing facility, if we move ahead. and that can be used by sales tax dollars, and they would need to relocate. I think the particulars of how they will relocate still need to be sorted out. I know Ms. Tierney and I have had lots of conversations about that, and we'll continue to have conversations about identifying options on how the VFW could be on city land. And we'll bring back that discussion for the council to consider options on that. Under the plan, the VFW would be responsible for building their new facility. So, but we do want to consider other options as part of that, but we may be restricted on what we can and can't do. I've had several meetings with the VFW in 2024 with the post commander and their leadership and talk through some of the project. Generally speaking, I think they're excited about the project and opportunity. Certainly there's a lot of details to be worked out, and I can be assured that as we get into the details, those conversations, we're gonna take some time to sort out all the details on that. I do have a meeting scheduled with leadership on January 30th, so we'll beginning that discussion about kind of how the framework could be taken up. I know even though the VFW won't need to be relocated for a couple of years if we go according to the plan, I think the council wants to have some assurance that we have something at least tentatively planned or conceptually frameworked out, so we have some confidence in moving ahead. So I think that's pretty important to get done here in 2025. I mentioned the zoning and land use things. We need to change the zoning designations of the park to institutional. The VFW and Lexington shops are zoned, I can't remember the exact classification, but it's a business, would need to be rezoned institutional, and the comp plan would need to be guided. In addition, the park, I guess we call it easement, would need to be vacated officially because that was part of a plat. So we'll have to put all those things in motion here at some point in 2025 on that. Real estate transactions, I already mentioned the VFW we need to purchase. Depending on how we end up having them located on the campus, there might be some additional transactions there. Also mentioned the Lexington shop tenants. We are required to provide relocation dollars to them. I already have a relocation specialist working with those folks, and once again, this is still 2+ years before they would actually have to move. We have to tear down that facility, but looking at working with them. So there's other transactions we're gonna need to do along the way, so I just wanna point that out to the council. We mentioned real quickly the park replacement. The council has talked about this several times already, but losing veteran parks is not necessarily desirable, but it's needed for this project, and we wanna make sure that we look at replacing those amenities some way, somehow throughout the city. It could be potentially in one location, it could be over a series of different places. We've had initial conversations with the school district, but we don't wanna rule anything out here, so the Mr. Johnson, the Parks and Rec Department, is just starting to go through some of that process, and that will be a separate parallel process, but that's something that I think we wanna sort out, and I know the council has been really determined to make sure that we have some replacement going on, replacement of the amenities in the space. And then finally, the timeline. I'm just gonna switch files here. Well, two things. Here's a very broad, general guideline or timeline. And this needs to be tightened up, and having somebody on board can help us tighten that up. But roughly speaking, really spend the year of 2025, as I originally indicated, final design, but that's everything leading up to final design and sussing out all the details that we need to. And most likely start at 26. The phase 1 would start in site preparation where the park is, to start constructing a portion of the new maintenance facility. Then after that is complete and we move our maintenance operations as much as we can across the street, then we need to look at tearing down the existing maintenance facility and then start constructing or having the site ready for the construction of a license and passport center. Once again, if we go with the pre-design and the VFW construction as well. So that's gonna be a pretty long period as you phase that in. And then 28 to 29, we complete the maintenance facility building, the final parts of that, and then really construct that yard and the storage bins on there, and then also create the green space that I call New Veterans Park. That hasn't been decided by anybody, but new green space. So really looking over a period of 4 years before this project potentially could be done. Obviously, as we move forward, I think we can tighten up that timeline and have a better sense of it. Earlier this afternoon, I did provide the council with a slightly different timeline that provide more detail, and there are copies in the back for folks. And trying to really look at some of the decision points and things we need to take up. This is a very high-level approach. There's a lot of more details that need to be worked out, but I just want to identify them because I think there was some.
Still not up on the screen.
What happened there? Okay. Try that again. There. Okay. Not sure why that defaults to, I'll try to blow this up. But you do have copies. So really try and look at some of the major components. This is a very high-level approach. The cells that are in yellow are discussions and or decisions. And I just put some months to it, and I would say this is very, very, very preliminary. I was looking at it again later this afternoon. Oh, there's some things I want to add and change on here, so I'd love your feedback on it too. It would be helpful, and we'll continue to work on this. But this is just kind of showing how it would play out the rest of 25. So, starting at the top, I won't go through every cell here, but sooner than later, we need to really sort out what we're doing with the License and Passport Center. Meaning, are we going ahead to consider constructing something on city campus? And then followed by that, look at what the funding would be, and then try to also, and we might hear this tonight, some preference to look at existing buildings on the site, and that will lead into some other work on our part. The VFW, we want to be working on negotiating the transaction for the final design stakeholder group. And once again, this is just months that I picked, but we can shift as we need to the formation of the design stakeholder group. I think we probably don't want to begin those meetings until we're pretty confident the project's moving ahead and we're ready to go to the final design. So that could be shifted even further into 2025. And it gave us 6 months of, or 5 months of working time. Whether it takes that long, I don't know. So the architect and the construction project manager, this is one of the things I would change based on some of the feedback, is that instead of having the full RFP for the full architect for the full design and bringing on a construction project manager, I would narrow that down to look to hire just the architect to help us determine some alternatives, layouts and or options to consider, especially with the License and Passport Center. So that would probably be the most immediate ask, and the other things would follow down the road as we move ahead with the project if we do. The sales tax, once again, these are just ones I put it in. We may be in a position, if we do want to collect it, but starting July 1st, to look to approve the implementation sometime in February or March. The financing, I would mention that so there's going to be two types of financing. One is the sales tax revenue bond that we could issue. Then also the second part would be what we're doing for the License and Passport Center, which would come down the road. Most likely, even if we decide to a particular type of bond, we probably would still, it would take us some time to later in the year before we would actually issue. There's a lot of procedural things we need to do and everything like that. So I'm too optimistic with that May 25, even if the council is comfortable, so it'll be closer to the end of the year. So just so you know. You notice the Maintenance Operations Center doesn't have a lot of work on anything until more the end of the year, because that we need to sort out other things first, and then if we get to the final design process, that needs to be completed before we start looking at approving the final design. Talked about the land use, about the Planning Commission involvement and making some decisions, and I just put in here commissions will be constantly updated each month. So that's a little bit more detail on there, and this is something that I think is going to be a living document and something we can continue to help out. But hopefully this provides some sense of order or some sense of things that we need to do, at least in the large swaths. So let me just wrap up the presentation. The last thing I mention is here is the cost. This is per the pre-design.
Presentation mode again.
Yeah, sorry.
Slightly bigger.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
There we go. Thank you. My screen shows something different, so I don't want to see
That's what I was doing.
So these are numbers from the pre-design report. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of numbers in here that are contingency and inflation. So if you look at the left-hand column, we have design contingency of 8%, construction contingency of 5%, inflation 21, 28, 35% of the costs, soft costs and owner's contingencies, owner's costs. So all those things, especially those last 4 or 5, the building construction, site construction are probably fairly decent numbers. There's a lot of sway in those numbers here, and we'd want to make sure we dial that in a little bit and have some real numbers. And so you can see how they broke it into phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Really can't answer what's making up all these numbers, although we have some detailed spreadsheets. I think we need to have somebody else on board to really help us do this. But I just show you this just to show kind of what all the components of the project are, and the fact that we have a lot of contingencies in there. So the hope is that the end costs aren't going to be as much, but I can't guarantee that as well. I would note too, if you did the addition that says $65 million for the maintenance operations center, and we only are authorized for $64 million, I would state unequivocally that we would not look to spend $65 million, $64 million of sales tax and make it up from property tax. We will be living within the means of the sales tax authorization, so no more than $64 million. Project's gonna come in higher than that, we're gonna have to make some cuts and some choices to keep that within. There's no sense of me that wants to add to the property tax burden for the maintenance and operations center when we have a funding source. So I just wanna make that very clear. So that's the end of my presentation. I'll put up the questions here, so when we get back to it, you can certainly go down that list to the extent you want to. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon, and I do want to emphasize at this point for the council's benefit that these should be questions and clarification. I don't think we're ready to hear people's points of view necessarily quite yet on the questions that we're being asked, and not the least of which because we haven't yet heard from the public. So I really want to make sure that from a council perspective, we try to limit ourselves at this point to clarifying questions of what's sort of been out there or what may be missing from what's out there. So I'll open it up for council questions at this point. Councilmember Strong.
Thank you. In clarification of the first question, is that at the location as indicated specifically?
Yes, Councilmember Strong. I'm asking if we want to go ahead with the planning to have it shown in the pre-design plan, maintenance center north of Woodhill. Certainly the council can consider different directions, but that's what we have cost for and an understanding of how that would work. So going to a different location might add some additional costs, more or less, hard to say, and other operational needs. So that would probably be a different discussion. But yes, to directly answer your question, it would be for north of Woodhill.
Other questions? I did have a couple of questions I just wanted to clarify, and it's certainly okay if we don't have the full answer or an answer this evening. On the sales tax, I know we talked about the sales tax revenue being used to pay the revenue bonds that would be issued on the project. However, I also know we're potentially talking about incurring some upfront costs for, say, some architectural services and things like that. Can the property tax revenue also be used sales tax be used prior to the issuance of the bonds to pay some of those upfront costs, or are we totally restricted to only use it to pay the bonds, the revenue bonds, once those are issued?
My understanding is that we can use those sales tax funds after the fact. We passed a resolution, and I'm looking to Ms. Petrick back in the back row, that we can reimburse ourselves for bond processes after the fact. So similar, we talked about that with some of the water projects and stuff like that. So,
but I'd like for architectural costs, if we're doing architectural costs in the first quarter of this year and we haven't started collecting the sales tax, we can reimburse ourselves for those costs from the sales tax.
Yes, I believe so. Now, put a point on it, if we're talking about this license and passport center.
Correct, we have to differentiate between those two things, which may lead us to, depending on if we're doing both of those things, talk in terms of perhaps separate contracts and things like that, just to keep the accounting extra clear.
But similarly, if we were to issue a bond for license and passport center, we may be able to recapture those costs since we've identified
certainly
reimbursement for that So,
I just want to make sure we've got some options, because otherwise we're fronting those costs out of essentially either the general fund or other city funds.
and I should mention, Mayor, the reality is until we issue those bonds and receive those, we'll be incurring some costs that you would use existing fund balances that would then subsequently be reimbursed once we have those bonds.
That's important to understand. And I already asked my question about the storage or the other aspects of what might have been part of the overall category of the license center. Let's see, and so with as you said, the legislature only approves cities to be able to use the whatever it's called, construction manager risk type within the last couple of years. So we did not use that format for any of our prior projects. Okay.
There are several cities, as I mentioned, that have just recently used it. White Bear and Oakdale come to mind for current projects. There was recently completed projects, and talking to their administrators, they really liked that process. I thought it was really helpful for them.
And I imagine that either that construction manager is incurring those costs and getting reimbursed for those, or the city is incurring them in some fashion and also reimbursing ourselves for those, or we're doing it. Right, exactly.
Yes.
Because it's not like those services happen for free.
No, that'd be covered by sales tax for the maintenance center side.
Got it. And just to be clear, in terms of the conversations to date with the VFW folks, we have not been talking to them about building them a building or something along those lines, in terms of maybe the question that was brought up earlier in our meeting, in terms of sort of building things or providing things to VFW or an American Legion. That's not really what's been part of the conversation at this point.
We've had very general conversations. I think if anything, we've left it as more that they would need to construct the building themselves. And I think there's probably some practical limitations in the law about building for that, but we'll continue to explore that and bring that forward for conversation with the council.
Thank you for clarifying those points. Other questions from council members? Councilmember Bauer?
Just note the dance studio, I believe I saw some documents earlier, that would be more, not just a dance studio, it would be a flex space as well, like for senior programming or other events, not.
Yeah, I think it could be, and I'm gonna look to Matt Johnson for anything, but I think primarily a dance studio, but certainly it'd be an open space that could potentially be used for other things. I'm not sure we've gotten that far down the path yet, but Mr. Johnson, please help me.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I think you answered it quite well. Our current dance studio is pretty much limited to dance and yoga because of the tight confines. As with anything that we build, we want multifunctionality, so something that would be built from the ground up would be built with dance in mind, but we certainly want to put things there as much as we could, so multi-use would be pretty important to us, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Other council questions? Councilmember Strong.
Thank you. I had a question about the cost of purchasing the VFW and how that figures into the city breakdown that was indicated. Do you have the cost of the real estate itself and how that fits into that total $6 million?
So I don't have an exact cost. We would have to get an appraisal. It's currently assessed over $1 million. I can't remember the exact amount. So
tax assessed value.
Tax assessed value. So somewhere above $1 million, I would think. I'm not sure exactly where we'd end up on that. That would have to be sorted out through an appraisal and negotiations. And that could be covered by the sales tax because that's part of the project to purchase that property to make the maintenance center moving forward.
And are those costs included in the 6.5, because it's not a total VFW cost, it's our cost?
Yeah, you're talking about.
That would be in the 64 million.
Attachment 8?
In the 64.
Is that part of the soft costs or one of the other
Yeah, so it's not,
contingency
it
type costs?
wasn't identified directly in the pre-design study, but it would be under the construction design, or one of those contingencies, I should say. The owner's costs could cover that if you see that, but amongst those numbers, under the $64 million, it would come out of that. But it's not particularly identified under this breakdown.
And just to be clear, and I'll yield back to you, that any discussions we have about particular offers we might make or negotiations along those lines certainly would be closed sessions until such time as a deal is ready to be made public, just in terms of, so in the numbers we have to, that's why we're kind of talking in some of these couch terms about the numbers, because there isn't a specific deal or a specific price that's already out there other than just sort of some budgeting figures. Councilmember Strong.
And so then whatever amount, then that would offset their total cost of $6.3 million if they were to, whatever, 400,000 we offered, they said sure.
Yeah, so whatever dollars we give to them can certainly be put back into their project for construction of the building. And that 6 million, it's just like everything else, is inflated as well. There as well, it's the overall project, but regardless, whatever that cost is, they could put that towards it. Or they
And
might
then do we know what the total size of this project is? What is the total area of the needed space based on
Are you talking about the maintenance
the-
facility?
the pre-design plan?
Yeah, it's in the pre-design, I don't recall offhand. I'm gonna look at Mr. Fryhammer.
Actually, the maintenance was 112,500,
Is that the square footage of the
That's the square
property or the building?
the building.
Okay, the
Yeah.
property is several acres.
Yeah.
I'm
Because
sorry, I don't have
I
those
wanna
numbers.
say it might have been eight plus, but that might be a low number.
That was in the pre-design.
Yeah, I was looking more the acreage.
Yeah.
Other questions, Councilmember Shorter?
Speaking of square foot, I was looking at the license center and that is 8,685. And when I looked at the cost per square foot, it came out to be about $1,400, it seemed high. So which would tell me either maybe it's not including a second floor as the square footage, or there's something extraordinary put into that. So I was just kind of curious on, is it mainly that there's something else in the cost, or is the square foot not quite right?
Councilmember Shorter, it's good questions, I don't know if I can answer. I would think that the 8,000 square feet does include the second story. Just in looking at the pre-design, we'd get clarification on that, but those costs are awfully high. I think, no question, and obviously the contingency stuff drives some of that, but we really need, along with everything else, but really in that number, we really need to understand for the council to have a fully informed decision in front of them, on how much are we planning on spending for that, because that just seems
Right.
awfully high.
Especially when you compare it to the other two, because the BFW you could do by square foot is 613 and the maintenance center is 579. And so when the license center is so much higher, then that's why I was wondering, there might have been something else in there, maybe soil mitigation or something that may, because of the gas station or who knows what.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm just kind of curious about that piece.
So we'll put that on the list to try to understand what the pre-design numbers come from, if we can determine that, but certainly strive towards getting another calculation on that as we move forward, so we move ahead.
I appreciate that, thank you.
Other questions for clarification from staff? No. All right. Well, I think this is an opportunity then, a good spot to look to get some public input as part of this discussion. We appreciate the fact that I think we've got a good representation of folks in the neighborhood who are invited to be here this evening, are made aware of this discussion. We'll just do a quick overview of the rules of the road for public comment. We've got the two seats here. Certainly if one person is speaking and somebody else is ready to go next, they could have a seat in the other seat, and vice versa as we go forward, so that we kind of keep the process moving in respect to everybody's time. If you want to be the next person to speak, certainly people can queue up in the kind of the seats right in the front of the audience there to be ready to go after the two people that might be at the table are done speaking, assuming we have that many people interested in speaking. But just want to kind of give people some idea of the logistics there. We do have by council rule a 3-minute time limit per speaker, and you do get one opportunity to speak on each agenda item, so that is the part of the rule of the council. We would ask that you begin your comment with your name and either your street or your address, whatever you're comfortable with, to help identify for the official record. If you have a name that isn't something we're going to easily figure out how to spell, once you're finished with your comments, you can step off to the side. There's a clipboard here, and you can just spell out your name to be able to help folks when they're putting together the meeting minutes for the official record. And we'll try to move that a little closer to Pat so it's not right in front of people that might be trying to speak. Let's see, one time, 3-minute time limit, say your name, address council. Comments or questions to the council. We will try to accumulate the questions that may come up and work to try to get answers once the public comment period is over. There may be things that we won't be able to answer, but we can try to direct staff to come back with answers and that sort of thing. And some questions may be more philosophical or questions that the council has to answer through its own discussion. So we may not be able to answer those until we have that discussion as a council. So hopefully that helps kind of give us the rules of the road and what's to happen here during public comment. But with that, and certainly the other thing I'll say is that you can refer to anything that's been presented up to this point on this item in your comments. If you've got comments about any of the questions that the staff has sort of put forward or one specific, either way, feel free to participate in public comment at this time to provide that feedback or ask any questions that you have. With that, we'll open it up for public comment, and I see we've got our first commenter here to kick us off.
Hey, Roger Hess, Wagner Place, and let me know about 30 seconds left.
Got it.
Okay, so this has been going on since before COVID, been talking about this, and every day you delay it, it costs more money. So I really don't like that you're thinking of building in 3 phases. I just want to get it done. And really, to build the shelves, the walls and the roof, they just bring in the panels and lift them up and put them together. So it should only take a few months to actually build the building for the maintenance center. So the main thing is to get everything else out of the way so you can get going on that. So myself, I think you should move the license center onto property that's rented for about 2-3 years. And then the VFW, I think you should just pick it up and move it toward Lexington and then swap land so they own their own land and you don't have to play around with anything. Just move it a few feet to the east alongside Lexington. That'll give you a buffer between Lexington and the beginning of the maintenance civility property. Plus they'll be on their own property. And if you just pick it up and move it, because I've watched guys, my dad's friends, move way bigger buildings than that. And therefore, they wouldn't have to build a building. It wouldn't cost them anything because you'd pay to move it. And you wouldn't cost anything because you just swap the land. You give them a piece of land the exact same size as what they got now. And then that's all done. Now that everything's cleared out of there and you can start building this maintenance facility, which we need really badly. And I believe there's someone in the Midwest area has built one recently that might be very similar to what you need. And I would just say, go and look at it, get their plans and get started on it rather than spending months or years redesigning. It's nothing special. It's just a big warehouse basically with some office space in it. So you don't really need to be reinventing the wheel for this thing. And then that gives you 2 or 3 years to figure out what to do with the license center. Maybe you'll wait and build a new one, when the other bonds are paid off. Otherwise, the police department needs space. Why don't you just move the license center and everybody else into the old Public Works building and give the police department all this building except for the council chambers? Then you guys could have all new offices for all the other departments over at the Public Works. Because I'm telling you, when they redid my building, updated building, some of us were built in 41, that the building looks beautiful inside now and outside. So they can do amazing things with buildings, with old buildings. And you've got geothermal and solar panels there. So it doesn't cost much to run that building.
15 seconds.
Okay, so there you go. And I don't like the manager with the risk thing because whoever the manager risk is has to somehow figure out what the costs are gonna be and add a bunch of padding in to make sure he's right. Whereas if you just get a manager and you pay the bills, you're paying what the actual bills are. This risk guy is gonna have to try to get some padding in there. It's gonna cost the city more money than just paying what the actual costs are. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you.
And hopefully lots of other people will talk.
To that end, we have an open mic. Hello and welcome.
Tyler, we're at Grigg Street, 2750 there, and
can you say your last name for the record?
Cluse. All right, thank you. Preferably, I think we would, not want the building directly in our backyard. The first thing we walk out of our door and look at this monster building, but you guys need your space. So I guess I'm kind of curious on some of the plan details. Could you pull up that like pre-planned slide that you had there. There we go. So I'm curious, like Lexington Avenue elevation wise, you know, is a lot higher than where you'd say our backyards are. It's kind of like a slow, gradual slope. So I'm curious as to like what kind of grading you're gonna do there for that building itself. Are you planning on like leveling it all out as to where like the back of the building one is there? And keeping like a level parking lot going up to Lexington? Or are you gonna like bring dirt in back towards the back of the big building there? And my concern is the building's what, like 30-some feet tall? And we're sitting in the backyard. You're gonna bring in, you know, 4 feet of dirt. That's gonna raise the building up even more. So I'm just curious, you know, how tall is it gonna be when we're just sitting in the backyard there?
We'll make a note of that question and follow up after the public comment is over.
Sweet.
Any other questions?
And then I'm just curious, you know, what does the park do to our property values? You know, having it right there in the backyard, I just do a simple little Google search and it says the park can increase your value by, you know, 8 to 20%. So what does that mean? You know, it's not a really nice new updated park. Even on the lower end of our house, let's just say is $300,000, you know, that could be $30,000 in property value we're talking about losing. So that's just something I wanted to keep in mind and talk about too, so. Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other public comment? Hello and welcome.
Good evening. I'm Matthew Droll, 2736 Grigg Street North. Like my neighbor just said, I think our primary concern as residents is, number one, we would encourage the council to not put this in our backyards. There is no other city in the state that has a public works facility in a residential neighborhood like this. It belongs in an industrial area on the outskirts of town, where it's not taking away from residents and our green space and our property values. And I think that is something that we're very concerned about. I mean, I've been here for 10 years. We use that green space for our dog all the time. And, you know, I like the community, I like the neighborhood we're in, and this will significantly alter that. And like Tyler said, I do think that there needs to be something done to address the impact on our property values, and there should be some compensation for us if this does go forward. And then secondly, I'd like to ask a question about when this was all put up to a vote, there was a frequently asked questions section. And in that, there was a question about why this particular location, and it stated that the city already owns all of that land, which we know is not true. And that is something that may have influenced voters to agree to pass this. Whereas if it was stated that they'd still have to purchase from the VFW, that might have influenced things a different way. So, you know, I have some concerns because that was clearly misstated.
All right. Additional comments, questions? You've got some time.
I would just encourage you all on behalf of us living on Griggs to reconsider the location and put it more of an industrial area where it belongs, not in a neighborhood.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Other public comment on this item this evening? More opportunity. Is there anyone else from the public that wanted to speak to this item this evening? All right. We'll go ahead and close the public comment then, and we thank folks for being here and for participating to this point, and certainly want to continue to make sure that we are doing engagement with folks in the community about this. I think there was probably the most specific question as it relates to the grading and the height of the building. And I'll start with my suspicion, and then perhaps if there is any further clarity from staff. My suspicion is that typically when there is a project where there is sort of elevation differences, there is some lowering of high parts and some raising of low parts. But sometimes it may be that everything gets lowered to the lowest point. So I'm not exactly sure, but I think the idea is to try to be as efficient with fill versus removal and things like that as possible. I'm imagining it's gonna be a pretty level site otherwise, but I'll turn it over to Mr. Freihammer if he's got additional information.
Just gonna swap this real quick.
All right, so this is, thank you, Mayor and Council. This is from the Civic Campus map, or the pre-design project. So this was just a concept of showing what it would look like leveling based on just some preliminary design. So certainly subject to change. But they did show off the property line, it's approximately 65 feet is where the face of the building would be. Showing the height of the houses to the roof, which is 19 feet. They show this building approximately 28 feet to the height. The one thing this graphic does not show is what the difference is to that elevation, so we'd have to look in a little bit of detail, but that gives a little bit of scale. Certainly that's something that would have to be worked out in much more detail in final design, but that's kind of a preliminary concept of what that would look like. But obviously if you move the lot line east or west, change the height of a wall or something, or even a foot or two of grading, that can change things significantly.
And also things like berm height could.
Correct,
as far
berm
as
height,
what you see.
plantings, different thing like that.
So this isn't written in stone in any way, but it's.
Correct, but that was the concept that was presented in the pre-design.
Okay. That's helpful at least to get some perspective on it. And certainly ultimately the detailed plans would give us exactly, and if we try to attempt to provide some direction one way or another, especially based on what we're hearing from people in the neighborhood, that can be factored in, and we look at what the additional cost might be and whether that makes sense to do it or whether it can be done in the budget, et cetera. So it seems to me there's some ability to work with that, but at least this gives us a starting point. The other thing, just in relation to like a berm on that side, I'm imagining that from a stormwater perspective, the site has to take care of its stormwater on site. We can't be putting water onto another site. So for instance, at the bottom of a berm where water might be running down, there needs to be potentially drains or collection points or rain gardens or some combination of that to get the water from running into neighboring properties.
Correct, just like if anyone else developed their property, we wouldn't allow them to discharge any additional water onto that property. So if we need to add additional storm sewer, that would be included with the project.
All right, and in terms of if there were existing problems in the area that already are coming off the site, is there potential that we could try to address some of those with the project as well?
Correct, most likely, typically with any improvement, you can solve those problems.
And that's largely because we're meeting 2025 water management standards as opposed to 1977 or whatever.
Correct.
Which are more stringent, was my point. All right, I think that gets to probably the biggest technical question. I think a number of the other questions related to more, the project itself. I don't know that we can answer a couple of the questions as to like accelerating phasing or doing things differently until we perhaps get more information as a council. So I think at this point, other than having our council discussion, there may not be a lot more that we can address by way of questions that were brought up. But certainly if council has thought of more questions as part of the public input or as we've been moving through this process and want to get some feedback or answers on those, I think that would be appropriate at this time to maybe start a conversation with that. If there's any further things we need to fill in or more information we need for subsequent decisions, I think let's kind of open it up and start the process here. Councilmember Strong.
So have we given any consideration to Mr. Droll's suggestion about compensation for neighborhoods with their concern about a reduction in their property value based on having this instead of a park? Or additional costs that might come in from like sound mitigation and other things like that. I know there was the soft costs, but I didn't know what those could potentially include. I don't know that we would, I don't know. I'm not sure what the expectation or what that was meant to include.
Mr. Trojan.
Well, no, we haven't given any official consideration of paying the neighbors money for value loss. I think that would need to be talked a lot more. I'm not sure we can even directly do that, the way it's set up, but I think we want to talk about that issue with them for sure. Certainly the buffering, and other mitigation efforts, could help in that situation. I understand the fact that the building may be visible and it's not longer a park. So we're gonna have continued conversations on there. The cost for the berm and the softscaping and landscaping is factored into those costs. To what extent that is, hasn't been determined. But I think some basic premises is something that is desired by the residents that they think is gonna be effective. We want mature landscaping. Instead of stick trees, we want some developed trees that can provide year-round screening. If that includes a fence, that would include a fence. I think there's things we can look operationally to make sure that there is no other disturbances to the property. So there's a lot that we don't know, but we have to continue to talk about. So I really can't answer directly on that, but I think we would want to continue to work with the neighbors to mitigate all impacts as much as we can. I just don't know to what extent we can mitigate any financial loss if that's proven at this point.
Yeah, cause I would expect there'd be light mitigation,
Sure.
there'd be sound, having a
Sure.
24-hour facility adjacent to their homes that wasn't there previously.
Yep.
So,
And I would mention that the way the building is oriented, at least in the pre-design, there's no garage doors opening up to the west to their backyards. It's all north-south. There is a drive around the building, as you can see there.
On the west side.
On the west side, and that's really for fire code purposes. We require all buildings, including any private development, to have access, paved access around a building, so if there's a fire engine needs to go there. So we don't expect that to be used on a regular basis, certainly not operationally, but it's something that would be in place. While we are a 24/7 organization, typically we do not have activity there after 4 o'clock, except for emergencies, a water main break, or obviously snow plowing. And I've already talked to Mr. Freihammer about doing what we can to mitigate the sound just from the backup beep, beep, beep. There's some technology you can use that have a lesser beep, beep, beep. That's a really technical term, I guess. But, some other things we can do operationally, so I think we would want to continue to do that because fully in recognition that a park is a park and that brings some noise and activity there, but this is a different type of noise and activity there, so we want to mitigate that as much as possible.
and then just finally, that question about being somewhat unconventional and having this a maintenance facility in a residential area, and I know we're largely built, and I've definitely noted every time I see a building in Roseville that maybe could be used and told you about it. Can you speak to, obviously this has been part of the bigger process, but just if we have all these other implied costs that this necessarily is going to be the most cost effective, potentially the most cost effective in the long run.
Well, I think as part of the consideration, there was acknowledgement that we didn't own all the land, but we own quite a lot of the land, so the land costs themselves would be cheaper to locate. I think there was a very conscious conversation about operationally, it was felt that for the continuity, it'd be good to have it close to City Hall, in the center of the city. We've been operating as a maintenance center there since the 50s. I suppose you could say in a residential area. This brings it obviously a lot closer, so no doubt about that. I really can't speak to across the state if there's no other facility like that. I think truly they're done in large spaces where maybe there is some separation, whether that's industrial or just open space the city owns, a parkland for instance. We don't have a lot of those great options in front of us. We're fully built out. And so, the decision was made to keep it here on city campus and use some existing land. And so that's where we're at today, and we're gonna have to kind of work through that. There's always alternatives to think about, but that would kind of mean starting over in some respects. And I would caution that if we start over too much, I'm not sure how that would affect the use of the sales tax, because we had to very specifically show the legislature what we were using it for and what the plan was for and what those costs are. So I think that'd be pretty big decision to make that might alter how we could pay for it. I can't answer definitively one way or another, that would need a lot more conversation, but just a note.
Other questions from the council? Or items of discussion, direction that makes sense to the council? Councilor McGrath?
Number one, I think I'm really pleased we're having this discussion because 3 people here have not been involved in this from the beginning. The mayor and I have been, but there's a lot of information, and we started many years ago with this and collected information and asked questions at that time, so it's changed. But I was going to just mention that the cost update, of course, is crucial because these are almost like just general numbers now. So for me to make any decision further, I need to have that down at least as much as we can, because we have a shorter timeline if we go ahead with this now, and also I think coming off as the city manager mentioned, coming off of that time when we first got the numbers, we were coming out of a very high inflationary period for construction, and everyone was kind of shell-shocked by it and was very cautious about putting out numbers that we were thinking would not last down the road. Let's see, I had a couple other things here, I think. I was just wondering, return on investment of the, if we do build the licensing center. I would like to see numbers sometime in there. If we're getting 200,000 back into the general fund, how does that balance out with building a facility for them? What's the payoff and how many years out is that? Because buildings do have a lifetime, and I'd like to kind of know more about that. Construction manager at risk. What would happen if they don't meet their number? I mean, if we went down the road and they said, oops, I'm sorry, I'm off by $1,000,000. What are the remedies?
So my understanding, and I'm not sure how well versed Ms. Tierney is, I know she's somewhat, but my understanding is they give you a guaranteed maximum price, and that's what they're stuck with. So if they have project cost overruns on their own, they eat that, or we don't get charged more. I think the only exception might be some change orders that are approved by the city.
Of course.
I think that might be correct, but please add anything, Ms. Tierney.
I don't wanna, get out over my skis here. This is a pretty specialized area. I have people that know it, so I know just enough to be dangerous. But I think that it is a guaranteed maximum price, and the construction manager, that's part of their bid. They build their risk into their bid for that role. And if they spent more money and couldn't pay it or something like that, the construction manager risk is the entity that holds the contract. So they would be in breach of their contract with the other companies. So
And that would not affect us as far as liens against our properties or something like that, because sometimes when construction contractors don't get paid, they place liens against the property owner.
I believe that the construction manager at risk statute and all of that covers all of those issues. I don't know the intricacies of it, and I don't wanna give you bad information.
Appreciate that.
But this is a model, it isn't a new model, it's a new model for government. This kind of situation has been going on in the private sector for a long time. So this isn't, nobody reinvented the wheel here. It's just something that governments are now starting to do.
I think it's probably fair to say that potentially the bid cost for a construction manager at risk would be higher than a construction manager advisory because they're building their risk into the bid. But they would all be doing, everybody that's bidding on it would be doing that, and to the extent, the differential comes from their project costs, how much they put in for the risk, and all the other things that they factor into their business model of making a bid on a project. But I would note that I would imagine that if city takes on the risk of managing the contracts, the city is incurring some costs and exposing ourselves to some things that we're building into our contingencies and things like that as part of our costs of doing the project as well. So it's not like the risk, that the cost of the risk goes away. It's just that who's kind of paying it and how. Ultimately, we're paying it as the person building the project. It's just, do we pay it through the costs incurred by the construction manager at risk or through some other means, but ultimately the people building the project are the ones that would tend to pay for the risk one way or the other.
Just one more thing, and then I'll finish. I want to ask City Manager Trudgeon if on that advisory committee, I really think that the people on Griggs are more affected than the people across Lexington. So I know this is just a general idea on that committee, but I think having at least 2 people from there is more important than having it spread around. Because their voice, in my opinion, is the most important in this project.
And certainly, it could be 11 instead of 10 to accomplish that as well, yeah. Other council member thoughts, feedback? We try to give everybody one shot at it first here. If everybody, yeah, Councilmember Schroeder.
Yeah, great. Actually, you asked a few of the questions, so good, thank you. First of all, so really the first question, just to clarify, what we're asking is, should we go ahead and continue the conversation on this project? The things that would be set stone, I guess, would be that we would be doing it with the property we have, and in general, where the maintenance building is situated. Is that true?
Yes, that's correct. That's what I would be asking.
Okay, but then the rest of the detail would be very wide open when it came to like the license center and the VFW, and because I know there's some questions on if the VFW for some reason didn't want to sell, that would very much impact the design of the maintenance center. So that's thinking if kind of if then thing, if the VFW decides not to sell, what does that mean? So and I know you can't answer that tonight, but that's one of the questions and that I'd like to think about.
I think our attorney might have a thought there.
I think that the city can exercise its eminent domain authority in order to take the property from the VFW. And that's when we start talking about
Kind of like the end of the.
we start talking about relocation.
Yeah.
That's part of the eminent domain process. One of the first steps is to tell the property owners or renters in the case of the license center that they have a right to be compensated for the property that they're on and to have relocation expenses paid as well. So that the beginning of that process is already moving. It's not irretrievable, but the beginning of that process is already moving.
Well, and I would just say, from my perspective, and maybe I'm hitting what the city manager might say, it's certainly preferable to have a willing buyer and seller transaction. So that's kind of the starting point.
Yeah, exactly. That to date, they've been good conversations. We have to work with the details, but the intent would be to purchase that in a quote-friendly transaction. While eminent domain is a possibility, that's a policy decision for the council to make. I don't think we're anywhere close to having to use that solely to get the property. And I think we want to continue the negotiations. That has not been brought up to the VFW as far as an option because we don't need to, because we're talking collegially to each other and trying to figure out what we can do the best. But as always, there's always other options. Doesn't mean you have to do them. It's just options.
So and then we could address that at that time too. And then
just one more thing on the eminent domain, since it was mentioned, or the notion of taking, it is still a compensated thing. It's not something where literally the government is just taking it and not giving the other owner anything.
Yeah, it is compensated. This government has to pay fair market value. There are, yes, absolutely.
Opportunities to contest things through the process.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I just want to make, for people in the public that might have been watching and hearing the words taking and some of those things that are sometimes can create angst or concern, it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be angst or concern related to the eminent domain process, but certainly our intent is to do the friendly transaction, to have a willing seller buyer. And I think especially from the point of view of some of the tenants, legally the city is obligated to do some of these eminent domain type steps related to compensating for relocation, things like that. And so it is in our interest to start some of those processes, which I think we've been having some conversations for years since the city acquired that license center property.
Well, and then on the license center, and I think getting back to the square foot and the cost, you know, because it goes to wanting to take a look at some projections, revenue versus costs on that particular operation, I guess, just so to see what that looks like going forward, because I think the costs that are in there may be part of the dance studio, and so when you're doing a projection or looking at it, if you put the full amount of it in there, it may be not showing exactly how much of that is really for the license center. So I guess it'd be interesting to see breaking that out so you can do kind of a projection on, will it still be profitable if we do this? And I do know we have some other things in there that you know, we pay for on that. So, I mean, again, I agree with what Commissioner Graff was talking about on that. Let's see, and then I agree on to the architect piece. So what we're thinking on possibly, if we went ahead with this, would be then possibly have a separate this would be to help us figure out different pieces, but it wouldn't be, we're not hiring this person to come up with the master plan. Is that the idea?
Based on your direction, but that's what I'm suggesting, that the first step would be to just narrowly focus on design alternatives, and we'd want to flesh it out a little bit more about what the council would want to see versus having a full contract to do the full design. There'd be separate contracts. Whether or not it's a different architect that does each depends on what bids come up.
Different contracts,
But it'd be different
I guess.
contracts.
Yeah, that's what I meant, more different contracts on that. So on that, and yeah, and again, and then I think I just have one last thing at this point, is on that, the contingencies, you're right, they are, you know, when I went in and looked at it, some of the contingencies were like 90%. So that, so I think some of these numbers are definitely inflated, and I understand why that happens, so to try to figure out that a little better would help. And I do appreciate you also saying that 64 is the cap and we would not go over that, because that was one of the questions, as you know, I had. And so I appreciate you talking about that as well. And of course, there's a lot of little details, but I think I'll stop at this point.
Okay. Councilmember Bauer?
Thank you. I do like the rewording of the first question. I think controlling that scope. My question would be on the question regarding bringing on an architect to look at alternatives. You would need direction from the council this evening then to mitigate or whittle down that list of alternatives that you presented earlier.
So two things. One, we would want to craft an RFP, you know, but the scope of that we need to talk about what the council would want to have considered. And that might even be hard to say until we get further in the process, but generally outlined. So I guess if I'm thinking this out, that we would bring back a discussion at a future meeting with maybe a draft RFP with something that's blank, saying, okay, what's the scope that we want to do, and have the conversation. We can certainly have some suggestions and offer those to the council. Then, assuming there's some agreement on what that scope is, then we would just ask for authorization to issue that RFP, go out to the market, get bids, and then come back and make a recommendation to hire somebody, and then the council would approve that. Then we'd start that work in earnest. That would seem to be the most appropriate way forward to start answering some of the questions the council has at this point.
So at this time, you would be just looking for permission to put together that RFP for a future meeting, at which time we could scope out what that RFP is. Thank you. Correct.
Yep, correct.
RFP is request for proposal.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Often
Usually
called
that's me.
RFQ too.
So, yeah.
Request for quote. I wanted to, I think I've got most of my questions answered up to this point, other than things we can't answer at this point. I just to kind of maybe start the conversation on some of the specific questions, I think definitely probably the most important question to address this evening is question one, and just kind of that aspect of it. I think there may be some guidance we can provide this evening as to what more we need to know to answer some of the other questions, and perhaps we're able to say, let's start the RFP process for an architect or something like that based on how the conversation goes. My initial take on, because of the fact that the question related to the License Center Dance Studio did not pass, I think we need to be really conscious of our costs and of our approach there. So I'm sort of starting to lean, at least my initial lean is towards looking at trying to do something on the City Hall campus with existing buildings we have. I think we've got at least a couple that are, are larger in square footage than some of the pieces that were being looked at for whether it's License Center Dance Studio or VFW that may provide us some opportunities. Now, obviously, if somebody comes back and says, all the City Hall campus buildings that are in the maintenance center aren't able to be used, which seems pretty unlikely, but there may be costs associated with it. It still seems to me that may be a lower cost point than certainly than building a new building. But I think that's sort of I would at least like to consider that option, and perhaps as part of that, narrow in on costs for the building a building option. Although I'm still leery of that one just because it seems to be quite a bit more expensive than what we may be wanting to pay for as far as what we do there, and we still can preserve our ability to potentially look at another offsite location for the License Center, but still get some more answers as to some of the questions about how we might be able to approach it on-site. Because I think there are still some benefits to having that on-site, especially if we have some spaces that are larger than what we were projecting in the studies. That gives us some ability to address some of our other city needs for space, because one of the things that was identified in the earlier study that led to the pre-design was some other city space needs for things that happen in this building, as well as our operations more broadly. And if we can preserve some square footage that we already have for some of those purposes, in addition to addressing some of these needs, that may be beneficial. And I would just express my bias towards if we can at all make it work and it makes sense to do, having even a facility that maybe the VFW uses be a city-owned facility that we can potentially use for something else 100 years down the road. I mean, that's too far. Many years down the road, if for some reason the VFW model changes or the VFW wants to look at a different site for their own reasons, obviously they are their own entity and we don't want to tell them what to do. But I think that preserves some flexibility once again for the city to be able to repurpose space for other purposes down the road, as opposed to the whole complicated transaction of sort of land swaps or land sales and land purchases and some of those aspects. Once again, all the answers that might come back from the experts on that might say you can't do it that way, or you shouldn't do it that way, but that's just kind of where I'm at right now. So just to kind of start some conversation. So I think I'm okay answering question one as we should proceed with the planning and implementation as outlined. And then kind of you've heard some thoughts on some of the other questions, but I'll open it up for other council members to weigh in so we can try to narrow into to some guidance for staff.
No, I agree with what your comments, Mayor. I do think since the sales tax wasn't passed for the License and Passport Center, that keeping costs down for residents should be the guiding light on that project. The idea of using existing facilities and buildings that we currently have, I think is a good opportunity. And I will reiterate, there are definitely some space challenges for different departments in here, so we may end up being able to alleviate some of that with this. Again, this is dependent on some consultants coming in and architects looking in to see if this is a feasible approach. I also will reiterate the idea of owning the property and leasing it back to the VFW or some future entity at that time, but to keep that as an city-owned.
I just had a couple extra comments because I hadn't talked about the License Center in my comments before. I echo council member, who are we? Councilmember Graff's comments about the ROI. One of the residents brought to our attention that there is a new facility on Transfer Road, just 5.5 miles from this place right here. And they are open on Saturdays. So I don't know if we were going to continue the use of our Passport Center making sure that it could eventually pay for itself and whether we would need to expand our service days in order to be useful. A lot of people do tell me they would appreciate we had service on Saturdays. But also, I think we need to take into consideration that licensing and passports take different resources. A lot of those items can be done online. And a lot of the people who are in person have a lot of really intense needs. So it is a very different entity and a different process than it is before. And then I guess the one thing I haven't heard anybody mention is, you know, people are often asking for a community center. We do have the resource of this oval. If there was any, rather than build a whole new building, if there was an opportunity to expand a section onto the oval where a dance center, so that maybe it's more of a family one-stop shop that could be more of a community amenity than just a bunch of separate buildings that would take up, it would, you know, unearth less green space and potentially be a little bit step closer to a goal of having a community building where people are congregating.
Councilmember Groff, I think you.
So to get back to the first question, shall the city proceed with the planning? I think for me, the big question was this evening doesn't change the original question from years ago. We need a maintenance facility and we need space there. I've gone through it a couple times with different public works directors and it's obvious, so my answer would be yes, I think we should.
Other councilmember thoughts, feedback? Councilmember Short.
Yes, and now that we have clarified, you know, what question one is asking, I'm feeling more comfortable about saying, yes, let's continue to figure out how we want to do this. It sounds like that we're willing to look at many options and how, I mean, we do want to go ahead, but how exactly that's going to happen is yet to be determined. So that's how I'm seeing this and feeling comfortable with going ahead with question one.
Seems to provide some feedback on question one, Councilmember Strong.
I just want to check are there any situations that would occur that would stop us? Be like some information that would come forward that would say, oh, you know, this maybe isn't the best plan. So, I mean, I guess, you know, if we're going out, we're saying, yes, we're gonna start planning or implementing, is there a piece of information, a design cost, something we hadn't planned on that could potentially, I guess it's good for the residents to know if this is for sure going forward regardless, you know, is there something in our minds that could potentially change where it was, what it was, how it worked?
I think there's a long list of those possibilities, and that's why saying yes to the first one and investigating that and bringing it back to this council to look at, evaluate, I think allows us the ability and the flexibility to decide on anything that we want at that point in time. Being if also the costs are larger than we want, the timeline isn't what we want. This property is not available. The list could go on and on.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, which is why with question number one, you know, is a non-binding thing. It allows us to go further to be able to get to that definitive answer.
I appreciate your comment. I just wanna make sure that's the thought of the whole body, because I think prior members, I don't know that I felt that there was that flexibility to make other adjustments along the way.
Well, and I think what this is saying is we need more information and we are very interested in getting that. We still would have to approve anything to actually build it.
Mhm.
So I think that's where I'm looking at this as, you know, we are getting more information stage too. We know we need to address this issue, but we still have to approve whatever it is we come up with.
Well, I think I would go maybe even a little further, and that's okay, we don't all have to be in the same place. And I would say that, you know, we've been pretty darn conservative with all the estimates up to this point, with the intent that because we're going to the legislature to get approval to do a sales tax, we can't short ourselves, you know?
Right.
So I'm not saying that the numbers are absolutely right, but my hope is that we're actually high with those estimates in that we can come in within that, but also noting that, and I wanted to say it earlier, say we came in within it, and that meant we could potentially do more for mitigation, I think that would be something that we'd want to keep the ability to do within the overall $64 million limit, because I would rather put more dollars into mitigation. You know, now if we said, well, we can't even get the square footage we want at the 64 million with mitigation as it's sort of envisioned, you know, then we got to have those conversations. And so I think that's one of those points where we need to understand, because we have this limitation. We know what our revenue source is going to be and how much it's limited to. So we've got to do everything within that. And I think we want to make sure that we're not compromising what we're trying to achieve with this project. I mean, if we have to cut the budget so much that we're ending up with the same facility we have now, obviously that's not the objective here. So, you know, but I'll also say I don't necessarily envision that happening, but certainly, you know, if that's where numbers are coming back, that's a definite point where we gotta relook at this more closely, which is why we need better numbers to work with.
But that's why we're saying yes to the first question, given that we get good, I mean, there's.
Yeah, it's kind of a
lots
contingent
steps,
yes.
Just as we
Right.
have on this sheet that the manager gave us. That could possibly come up things, whenever you have a project, things have to be adjusted. None of this is going to go as planned. I mean, we might have the best plan in the world, but something has to be, we do our best to get as much information as we can, but we are going to be collecting, I'd say, more information for maybe 6 months to a year even.
Especially on some of the longer out
Right.
items. But I think staff is still looking to have some clarity sooner this year than later on exactly what we ultimately end up with the plan for the license center and dance studio side of it, because that does impact some of the plans for the what we do in the in-between phases and things like that. Yeah.
Correct.
So I think it was mentioned that the fire station and park renewal bonds payments go offline after 2027.
Yeah, it'll be in the
Those are-
27 budget. I think the actual payment occurs in 28, but it's part of the 27 budget. So there's
Largely 2028
2028
is free of that.
is free of that, yes.
Okay. And that was, you said something in the neighborhood of $2.4 million.
$2.4 million, yeah.
So, I mean, you know, certainly whatever we do for our license center and dance studio solution, you know, is not gonna cost as much as both the fire station and all the park renewal, which was $27 million. So our debt service for those things, even if the interest rate wasn't the same as that, is gonna be lower than the 2.4 million.
Exactly.
And so one of the other things I'm saying is that depending on where else we are from the point of view of our budget and everything else, you know, my objective would be to reduce the levy by as much as possible of that, you know, since we're no longer having to pay off that debt service. So just as a philosophical perspective going into it, you know, that's kind of where I'm coming from, because certainly we asked the taxpayers for that additional property tax to pay for those bonds with the expectation that when they were done being paid for, that they wouldn't have to necessarily pay that continued property tax amount. But as always, as things go forward and costs to the city change on other programs and other areas, we've already made some decisions in regard to some of our past bonding money, tax revenue, that we've used it for other purposes and maintained that level of property tax. But certainly the objective going in would to try to minimize that as much as possible. Other thoughts? Do you feel like you've got an answer to question one?
I believe I do, that we want additional information, and I think I have a sense of what information is we should talk about it, but bring back an RFP for architectural services to help us answer some of those questions, those alternatives, looking at the existing building and other things, and have a conversation as part of that RFP drafting about what the scope is, so we can really pinpoint, so we don't have to get into details tonight necessarily, but bring that back for a discussion, and then from there we go off and hire somebody.
And is this specific to the license center options as opposed to hiring an architect for the maintenance facility project?
I'm suggesting it's for the license and passport center alternatives.
Yep.
Now, if there's anything else you wanna add, if you wanna relook at something, I think that for the maintenance center, that gets, when we're at the final design stages, to look at material and all that stuff, so I think that can wait. See, front and center question is the license and passport center, where does it fit on the campus or not?
With respect to the architectural services.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for clarifying that.
not just the places of Passport Center. And we're also looking, well, the dance studio as well, but also, sorry, yeah, dance studio is what I was thinking of.
Conceivably, the
And
VFW
the
solution
VFW.
as well.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, the
If
VFW.
there is an existing space that can work, you know, for the
Right.
VFW, I think we'd want to understand that.
And looking at existing buildings. Yes, because there are other, you know, other thoughts on congestion in our city property that, you know, if we can reuse some of those buildings, that'd be great.
You're talking about congestion within the buildings in
Well,
terms
like
of space
here,
needs,
you know, like the police.
Not traffic
and-
congestion.
Yeah, no, the actual, you know, with using the buildings
Okay.
and trying to squeeze everybody in and everything in. We're outgrowing some areas, so.
I think that kind of gets to both the architect question and the operations center question one. Do we have, does council have a sense yet if we're prepared to provide any insight on the construction manager with risk versus the advisor? Or is that something that can be a subsequent decision point?
Yeah, I think I can wait a little bit. I mean, we introduce the subject, we can have further conversations. I think we focus right now on just the short-term architectural things. And then as we get ready to get to the final design, if we get there, then we'd have those conversations. And once again, it'd be the same process. We'd draft an RFP and run it through the council and maybe the commissions and just get the feedback on the scope and everything we want and have a more firmer understanding of the process. So you all are comfortable with that, and then issue the RFP and issue the contract after that.
I'd like to know the difference between the cost of those two types of, I mean, it might not be exact, but I'd like to just have a general idea. Is it 20% they add on? Is it 50%?
And it may be possible to get bids in both formats from people, potentially. I don't know. We may have to
Maybe,
do it
yeah,
in two
yeah.
separate bids or something, but because that's about the only way you're gonna really know the cost difference. I'm not sure people are gonna voluntarily say, unless there's other entities that have some experience with the two different approaches.
So we did talk to one company to understand it a little bit more, just the general process. And they gave an example where there's a $20 million process or a project. Going off my memory here, but I think the cost difference between the advisor and the at-risk was about $180-ish thousand, maybe $200,000 on a $20 million project.
So roughly about 10%-ish.
Yeah, and I don't know how specific that is, if the cost escalated, if you triple that thing, or if the costs are fixed or what.
The percentage may change depending on the size of the
So I
project.
wouldn't rely on that too much, but that's just some information we received, just to give you some scale dollars you're talking about.
On the engagement approach, council feedback we've already heard maybe looking at, and I would tend to agree, more representation from specifically the neighborhood to the west. Other thoughts as to sort of the general plan or the idea, the concept of it, and how that's
Having
structured?
commissions on there. I liked having representation from our different commissions.
Absolutely, commissions.
I would like to see probably from, it might be important to have someone from the Passport Center. I don't know if they are the licensing center, or is that not?
Maybe a staff
Well,
liaison.
I think a
to that.
staff person, yeah, it would be kind of serving as a staff person if there's
You
questions.
said VFW, so I just was wondering why they were left out.
Yeah.
Probably because the Passport and License Center is us.
They're right.
I think it might be helpful to have someone from the east side of Lexington as well, since they have to look at that wall and.
Right.
Oh, yeah, I think
So
it's
someone
definitely something we wanna include. I think the point being is more
You
representation.
said we could add someone on. I was just saying it.
And potentially someone from that apartment building.
Right. Yeah, that was definitely one of the ones listed. And obviously, you know, if we have more than one person from the east side and more than one person from the apartment building, I don't know that that's a bad thing necessarily. I don't know that a group has to be constrained to a certain size. If it's 30 people, that's a different question. You know, if it's 11 or 12 versus 10, I'm not sure that really significantly impedes
scheduling.
the performance of the organization.
The harder it is to schedule meetings.
Inconsistency.
Level of engagement on the IAP2 spectrum, is that kind of where we want to be? Does that make sense for those who might understand that?
It did have a sheet in there that kind of shows the different levels of engagement, so just for reference. I know some of us are familiar, but.
So it's the involve and collaborate area, right?
I thought it looked good, but.
I believe that's the correct involvement.
Seems to be council's perspective. All right, staff, any other feedback or takeaways from tonight or information that you need from the council?
Did we talk about the sales tax?
Yeah.
Oh, the sales tax, yeah, okay. What, that part? Yeah,
Do you have any sense of timing when you would want to do it? Do you want to hold off on doing that until you get through the architectural stuff? Or would you rather get that rolling now so we can start collecting July 1st?
I would rather get it going because I don't see what's going to change that we're not going to do that.
what's the difference between a decision on that tonight and a decision on that at a meeting in February?
Oh, no, we don't have to make the decision tonight.
Okay.
But if you want me to bring it
I
back for
think there was
consideration.
a particular question I had is, just to the Councilmember Strawn's point about, if we hit one of those things that says, oh my God, this is like something's not jiving right, what is, if there is, what is the process to sort of roll back the implementation? Because certainly, that's something to have in mind.
That's true.
I would rather not collect millions and millions of dollars in sales tax if it turns out. So that might influence exactly when the nuance of when we might put it into effect. So I think I'd like to know more about that.
Okay.
Other thoughts, council?
I'd be curious to know at what point along the process can we contact the Department of Revenue and terminate this? Meaning like, what's the last hour possible? Meaning that if we were to decide now, since they started on the quarter, can you do it the day before the quarter? I mean,
Oh, yeah, I see
right?
what you're saying.
When is the
Even before they start to collect.
even before they start?
Gotcha,
right?
yeah.
I think part of the reason that 90 days, they had to put out instructions to all the retail, everybody that says it, and so they have to change their software, so.
Which is what I want to know is
Probably
like,
the day before, probably not.
but I also
Said
can see
60 or
them,
90 days,
right,
yeah.
I can also see them saying like, no, once you do it, it's in the process and it's going to happen. And so I would like to know that answer.
So what I'm hearing is.
It's kind of the before it actually starts getting collected part, and if there is any way to roll it back after that point either.
And the other thing too is,
3-day rescission period.
Yeah.
and again, the proceeds of,
Did you have a specific thought on that? Maybe we're presuming things that we don't have the ability to do.
Well, Mayor, council members, you can terminate the sales tax at any point when you no longer need the money. There's,
We legally probably have to.
as a matter of fact, you do.
Yes.
There's an open question of what would happen with the money you had collected. It appears, I don't think the statute anticipates that you would start sales tax and then decide not to do the project. But if that did happen, I think from a fair reading of the statute is that you would owe the money then to the state. You can't obviously pay it back to the people who paid the taxes. So the state would then collect them. The state would then receive the money from the city.
Go into whatever appropriate fund at the state.
I'm sure they have one, yes.
Yes.
Because
If
it
they don't, they would
happens
find
sometimes that cities raise more than they need.
Mhm.
Because they do turn this on and off on the quarter. And so sometimes cities get more than they need. So whether they always collect that or maybe only collect it when it's a significant overage, I'm not sure. But I can talk to the Department of Revenue about how
It would be
hard
helpful
that
to
is
have that
roll it back
understanding.
and what the timeline on that would be.
And I was just gonna say, so I think I'm hearing that we wanna bring back, perhaps in February, another conversation about implementing it, but also answer these questions. And if the council's in a position where they feel they have the information, we could potentially take action in February. If we are looking for the July 1st, we have all the way through March too, so we can bring it back a couple times, but maybe we can start the conversation in February and provide the information and go from there.
And that certainly, knowing that March timeframe is important, yeah. Because just our agendas, we may have to shift things around, so it's always good to know how much ability we have to shift. Anything else we need to provide the insight and feedback and guidance on?
And I don't think I need the answer here tonight because I think you need funding for the license and passport centers way down the road. We have to figure out what the heck we're doing first and the cost. But so certainly as we move forward, we will be talking about the financing mechanism at some point, but I think that's well down the road. So I don't think I need any direct feedback beyond just trying to answer any questions that you have. So I think.
And just to that point, I think knowing that the debt service for the fire station and park renewal is coming offline at the end of 2027, you know, to me, it makes sense to use the property tax to pay the bond back to the extent possible. We can certainly mix in revenue from the license center, and potentially dance studio revenue. But, you know, I don't want to do it to the point where we're actually, you know, taking away the approximately 200,000 that is being used for tax relief now. So it would have to get the otherwise revenue from the license center, if possible. Unless there's any objection to that approach. Okay.
Yeah, so I think I have what I need for now. There's a lot more work to follow up, and I think as we all recognize, there's gonna be a lot more conversations on there, and you're not in a position to really make any firm determination until there's a lot more information. I understand that, so we'll keep working at that.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for being involved in this process, both of the council, certainly a lot of staff and attorney time, members of the public. You know, we want to continue the conversations as we go forward. There's definitely a lot of decision points yet to happen. So we'll be working through those and keep everybody informed as part of the process. All right. Council, do we need to take a break, or we've only got two agenda items left? Just roll through?
Let's roll through.
Okay. Thank you. The next item then is item 8A, which is to provide council direction on council member initiated items per council rule. In this case, I don't know, Mr. Trudgeon, if you wanted to introduce it, or I certainly could just take it.
That's your item. So.
Okay, all right. Yeah, it's a little different than other council members in that sense. This just deals with something that came up at our last council meeting, which was we had a petitioner from the public specifically petitioning the council representing a neighborhood. And in my enforcement of the time rules, I made the interpretation that he was a general speaker, and I realized afterwards that really probably wasn't the best interpretation of the rule, and that he should have been given more time. Now, you know, tell me if I'm wrong about that, but that's, I think, based on our past practice, that's how we've dealt with people who've, say, had an appeal of an action of the city before the council, or people who are applying for something from the city, and or people who are the subject of potential court citation by the city for a liquor violation or something like that. Usually those folks get such time as they need, basically, to represent themselves. So I thought it might make sense to put a rule specifically in our rules that makes that clear to everybody going forward. So that's what I'm talking about, and I think if the council wants to put that on a future agenda, that's what we're looking for tonight. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I'd be open to having it on a future agenda.
I think it's a good discussion to have, because I have had comments from public where there was, you know, where we have a presentation from an expert or from the staff, and they'll take 35, 45 minutes, and then they say, and then we get 3 minutes for rebuttal, and it doesn't seem fair to them. So I would like that discussion.
Okay. Other thoughts?
The only thing I would like to make sure is that if there is a presenter for an item, that is clear that that is the kind of the focal presenter, that there's not a sub-presenter and a sub-presenter and a sub-presenter who
Yeah.
each get 10 minutes. So maybe if there's someone, in this case, someone who initiated the petition and spoke on their behalf, I think that makes sense. But then I think that the subsequent people are aware that they get the standard 3-minute time limit and make it really clear. And so I think that's why it's worth a conversation.
Well, I was just going to say that we can certainly have some of those conversations when we have the conversation, but I appreciate that insight. That's a little fine line when we have these council member initiated items discussions.
In favor of bringing it up for the next meeting.
Just logistically, it sounds like we do want to have conversations, so it's not something we've just put on the consent for, you know, as we want to have the conversation. Okay, perfect. I did want to check in on that. And note that for any council member initiated item, that is always an option we can discuss as part of this discussion. If the council all says, great idea, we should just put it on a consent, we don't need to have a discussion for any council member initiated item, I want to make sure you all understand that that's my intent, is to make sure that we have that option. Because we don't want to make this process any more arduous than it has to be, or than it already is set up. So with that, Mr. Trudgeon, could you give us, speaking of the future agenda, some idea of what's coming up for the council?
Consent.
Yes, so we'll add that to the 27th meeting. So our next meeting is not next Monday, it's MLK holiday, so January 27th. We're claiming Black History Month, Optimist Day. We'll also receive a presentation from Chief Brosnahan about fire department staffing. I think he's reached out to all of you to potentially have some conversations prior to the meeting, but we'll present his information. We will be considering an ordinance amendment for the Clear Channel billboards that came in front of the council in November. It has gone back to the planning commission last week, and so that recommendation is coming forward. There's also a minor plat, I think it's just creating one lot on Roselawn Avenue. Look to approve the recycling agreement and recreation management software agreement. Those last two are tentatively planned on the consent agenda. I think we've worked out the details of the recycling contract, but certainly if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, we can talk about it. But I think all the policy decisions have been made around that, and this is just the agreement. The 10th of February, I think we'll hopefully add more items. I think we had a couple items we talked about tonight.
Potentially, yes.
But all we have officially on is discuss less mow May. Then the 19th and 20th, just remind you to hold those open for commission applicant interviews. I think it's been a little while since we've took 2 days, but that's always a possibility. I think we have quite a few vacancies, so that might be happening this year. The 24th, we don't, again, have a lot officially on Women's History Month, and we'll plan to receive, have the council receive a volunteer program update, just kind of all the things we're doing. And I just put down the future dates in March, just so we have some reference points for it. And that's the future agenda.
All right, thank you, Mr. Trudgeon. Are there questions from the council on the future agenda? Other requested future agenda items, reports, announcements, communications from the council? The catch-all category.
Just an announcement, the League of Women Voters Roseville area had a program on Sunday, yesterday, and it was called Behind the Gavel. It was really interesting because it covered, they had 4 judges there talking about what the role of each of the courts is and what the judges do and how you become a judge. And I just thought it was really good information because there's so much misunderstanding about what the courts do and what they, people feel they can make up laws and rules and really know they're very, very structured on what they can do. So it was informative.
Councilmember Strong, did you? Okay, I thought I heard you say.
I was going, and then I decided it was a plug for one group, and I'll tell you all later.
Got it, okay. That's what email through Pat is for. All right, if there are no other communications, announcements, reports, or future agenda items, the only item left on our agenda this evening is to adjourn. So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Groff, seconded by Councilmember Schroeder to adjourn. No discussion on the motion to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. We're adjourned at 9:24 p.m. Thank you, everyone.